When my wife finally walked through the doors of my daughter-in-law's lavish birthday party, she was trembling, her clothes torn and her face bruised. But in that mansion filled with millionaires, not a single person asked if she was okay. Instead, my daughter-in-law looked at her with pure disgust and screamed, "You ruined my perfect day, get out." I was ready to tear the room apart. But before I could move, my 7-year-old grandson ran out crying and shouted a truth that froze the blood in my veins. He pointed a shaking finger at the most powerful man in the room and screamed, "Grandma saved me, he hit her." My name is Tyrone. I am a 62-year-old black man, and for 35 years I broke my back on the Baltimore docks. I was a longshoreman working the kind of brutal bone-crushing shifts that most men run away from. I hauled cargo through freezing rain that felt like needles on my face, through blistering summer heat that baked the asphalt, and through double shifts that left my hands so heavily calloused I could barely feel the steering wheel on the long drive home. Every aching joint, every sleepless night, every ounce of sweat I poured into those docks was for one single reason: family. I wanted my son Jamal to have a life where he never had to break a sweat just to survive. My wife Beatrice and I sacrificed our own comforts to build a solid foundation. We paid for his private schooling. We paid for his college degree in full. We bought his first car. I even poured the vast majority of my hard-earned life savings into the down payment for the $2 million Buckhead mansion I am standing in right now. But looking around this massive room tonight, surrounded by towering crystal chandeliers, waiters carrying silver trays of caviar, and people wearing watches that cost more than the first house I ever bought, I have never felt more like an outsider. The air in here smells like expensive perfume and arrogant entitlement. It is a world I paid for, but it is not a world I belong to. I stand near the edge of the grand foyer, feeling the heavy, restrictive cut of my dark, tailored suit. Beatrice had picked it out for me specifically for this occasion. "Tyrone, you need to look sharp for your son," she had told me, smoothing my lapels with her gentle hands just this morning. Yet amidst this crowd, I might as well be wearing my old neon high-visibility work vest. The wealthy guests look right past me. Their eyes slide over my face like I am part of the hired help or a piece of outdated furniture. Tonight is my daughter-in-law, Chloe's 32nd birthday party. The house is packed wall to wall with her circle of friends. Corporate lawyers, plastic surgeons, real estate tycoons, and socialites who have never worked a day of hard labor in their lives. I swallow my pride, ignoring the slight ache in my knees, and start scanning the sea of expensive dresses and tailored tuxedos for my son. I finally spot Jamal near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook a glowing, heated infinity pool. He is holding a delicate flute of champagne, laughing far too loudly at a joke made by Chloe's older brother, Brad. Brad is exactly the kind of man I spent my life warning my son about. He is a slick, smooth-talking white American real estate developer with custom Italian suits and a smile that never quite reaches his cold, calculating eyes. There is a sleazy, inherently shady energy about him. I have heard the whispers around Atlanta about how he does business. Shady zoning permits contractors getting stiffed shell companies, masking his failures. He has the kind of arrogance that only belongs to a man who has never been told no, a man who believes his wealth makes him untouchable. I walk over to the two of them, hoping to pull my son aside for just 5 minutes of genuine conversation. I place a heavy, warm hand on Jamal's shoulder. "Hey, son," I say quietly, trying to cut through the loud jazz music playing in the background. "Have you heard from your mother yet?" I am starting to get a bad feeling. Jamal barely even turns his head. His eyes dart nervously toward Brad, as if he is terrified my presence might offend the man. He gives me a quick, dismissive nod and physically steps away from my hand. "Not now." Dad. Jamal mutters, keeping his voice low and tight. Brad and I are in the middle of talking about a huge commercial development deal. Just grab a drink from the bar and mingle. I will find you later. He brushes my hand off his shoulder, as if I am nothing more than a piece of lint, dirtying his expensive suit. My own flesh and blood. The boy I carried on my shoulders through the rough streets of Baltimore. The boy I worked double shifts for, so he could hold a pen instead of a wrench. Now he stands here acting like a desperate lapdog, begging for the approval of a man who wouldn't cross the street to spit on him if he were on fire. I clench my jaw, feeling the familiar hot sting of disrespect flare up in my chest. I take a slow step back. I watch Brad smirk at me, a condescending, pitiful little grin that makes my blood boil. It takes every ounce of self-control I have built over 6 decades not to wipe that smug look right off his face. But I keep my temper strictly in check. I am a guest in this house, even if my retirement funds bought the very marble floors they are standing on. The sharp anger quickly gives way to a creeping, heavy anxiety that settles deep in the pit of my stomach like a lead weight. Where is Beatrice? My wife is the absolute rock of our family. She is a woman of grace, of strict routine, of impeccable manners. She went over to this house nearly 4 hours early to drop off a special hand-crafted gift for Leo, our 7-year-old grandson. She also wanted to help Chloe set up the extravagant floral arrangements before the caterers arrived. She promised me she would meet me here in the foyer the moment the party officially started. But the party has been going on for over 2 hours now, and she is nowhere to be found. I pull my phone out of my pocket for the 8th time tonight. I press her name on the screen. The call rings 4 agonizing times and goes straight to her voicemail. Beatrice, honey. It is me again, I say into the phone, pressing my hand over my other ear to block out the loud laughter of the party. Please call me back the second you get this. I am getting really worried. I end the call and stare at the blank black screen. This is completely wrong. Beatrice is never late. She is the kind of woman who shows up 20 minutes early to a Sunday church service. She calls me if she's going to be delayed by 5 minutes at the grocery store. She would never under any circumstances just vanish without a word. I walk purposefully toward the grand spiral staircase, my mind racing through terrible scenarios. Maybe she is upstairs with Leo. Maybe she felt unwell and laid down in one of the guest rooms. But before I can place my foot on the first marble step, a sharp, incredibly irritated voice cuts through the ambient noise of the room. Tyrone, please tell me your wife is not seriously doing this to me today. I turn around slowly. It is Chloe. She is dressed to the nines in a clinging silk designer gown, a heavy string of real diamonds glittering around her neck, and a look of absolute, unfiltered disdain contorting her face. She has a half-empty glass of red wine gripped tightly in one hand and is gesturing wildly with the other. 2 of her wealthy, identically dressed friends are standing right behind her, sipping their drinks and watching me with amused, judgmental expressions, like I am some kind of entertaining peasant brought in for their amusement. Doing what Chloe I ask, keeping my posture straight, and my voice deep and perfectly steady. Chloe lets out a dramatic, exaggerated sigh, rolling her eyes toward the ceiling. Disrespecting my timeline. That is what she is doing. We were supposed to serve the prime rib dinner 45 minutes ago, but the caterers are standing around doing nothing because Jamal insists we sit down as a complete family before the food is brought out. It is incredibly selfish, Tyrone. This is my 32nd birthday. This is not some casual, cheap backyard barbecue in Baltimore. Everything was supposed to be absolutely perfect, and she is ruining it. The casual disrespect dripping from her words, the deliberate nasty little jab at my hometown and my working-class roots. It is a masterclass in passive-aggressive cruelty. Chloe has always been exactly like this. From the very first day Jamal brought her home to meet us, She made it painfully clear that Beatrice and I did not fit her high-class aesthetic. To her, we were too loud, too working class, and simply too black for her pristine, carefully curated world. She tolerated our presence at the wedding and at the holidays for one reason only: my money. She was perfectly happy to cash the massive checks I wrote to fund her extravagant lifestyle, but she resented having to actually look at the man who signed them. I take a slow, measured breath, forcing down the fiery anger rising in my throat. "Chloe," I say, my tone dropping lower, colder. "Beatrice has not answered her phone for almost 4 hours. She came here early today to help you set up this very party. Did you see her when she arrived? Did she mention where she was going?" Chloe waves her hand dismissively, completely indifferent to my concern. A drop of red wine sloshes over the rim of her glass and spots the floor. "I barely saw her, Tyrone. I was locked in the master suite getting my hair and makeup done for 3 hours. She probably forgot the floral arrangements and had to drive all the way back across town to get them. Honestly, it is just exhausting dealing with this. She is ruining the entire sophisticated vibe of my evening." Chloe turns her back slightly toward me, addressing her 2 friends, but making sure her voice is loud enough for half the room to hear. "This is exactly what happens when you try to include people who simply do not understand basic high society etiquette. It is just so classless. You try to bring them into a nice environment, and they completely lack the grace to handle it. That is it." The thread of my patience snaps. I step right into her personal space, my 6'2" frame towering over her. The friendly, accommodating father-in-law act is instantly gone. The seasoned longshoreman who spent decades dealing with tough, ruthless men on the docks comes crashing to the surface. "You will watch how you speak about my wife in my presence," I say. My voice a low, dangerous rumble that demands immediate attention. Every word is heavy with a clear, undeniable warning. The surrounding area grows suddenly quiet. The jazz music seems to fade into the background. Several guests stop talking and turn their heads to stare at us. Chloe takes a sudden step back, her pale face flushing with a rapid mix of shock, embarrassment, and furious indignation. She opens her mouth, her eyes narrowing, likely preparing to scream at me to call her security detail or to throw a massive, humiliating tantrum right there in the foyer. But she never gets the chance to utter a single word. Because at that exact moment, the heavy double mahogany front doors slowly creak open. The sound of the hinges is surprisingly loud, cutting straight through the dead silence of the foyer. A gust of cold, biting night air blows into the house instantly, chilling the warm, perfumed atmosphere of the party. I turn my head quickly toward the entrance, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I am praying with everything I have to see my beautiful wife walking confidently through those doors, armed with a simple, reasonable apology for being late. But as the doors swing fully open, nothing in this world could have prepared me for the terrifying nightmare standing on the threshold. The heavy double doors swing open with a slow, agonizing groan that echoes across the marble foyer. The biting Atlanta wind sweeps into the mansion, instantly killing the warm chatter and the soft jazz music. I turn my eyes toward the threshold, expecting to see my wife wearing her usual warm smile, ready to offer a polite apology for her delay. I expect to see the woman who has been my flawless compass for over 3 decades, carrying a beautifully wrapped gift and brushing the cold off her elegant coat. Instead, the sight that greets me stops the very blood in my veins. Beatrice is standing in the doorway, but she is barely standing at all. She leans heavily against the doorframe, her breathing ragged and shallow. The custom-made emerald silk dress she bought specifically for this occasion is ripped at the shoulder, the fabric hanging in jagged shreds. She is missing one of her low-heeled shoes, her stockinged foot resting on the freezing stone. Her normally immaculate hair, which she spent 2 hours styling this morning, is wildly disheveled and plastered to her forehead with sweat. But it is her face that makes my chest cave in. A dark, ugly, purplish bruise is blossoming across her left cheekbone, swelling so fast it is already forcing her eye half shut. A thin trail of dried blood marks the corner of her trembling lips. She is clutching her purse to her chest with both hands like a lifeline, her knuckles stark white, her entire body shaking with a violent, uncontrollable tremor. The strong, proud woman who raised our son and stood by my side through the bitterest winters on the Baltimore docks looks completely broken. My mind goes entirely blank. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes stops. The whispers of the wealthy socialites die away. For a split second, the entire $2 million mansion is plunged into the silence of a graveyard. All my instincts, honed by years of protecting my family, scream at me to move. I drop my drink on a nearby table, not caring as the glass shatters against the marble, and I lunge forward to catch her. But before I can take 3 steps, Chloe erupts. There is no gasp of horror from my daughter-in-law. There is no panicked rush to see if her mother-in-law needs an ambulance. Instead, Chloe steps directly into my path, her face contorted in a mask of absolute venomous outrage. Her designer heels click sharply against the floor as she marches toward Beatrice. "Look at you!" Chloe screams, her shrill voice slicing through the silent room like a razor blade. "Are you completely out of your mind? You show up 4 hours late to my birthday party looking like you just crawled out of a dumpster. You are an absolute drunken embarrassment." I freeze for a fraction of a second, unable to process the sheer audacity of her words. Beatrice is swaying, her eyes unfocused, clearly in a state of deep physical shock. She tries to open her swollen mouth to speak, but only a dry, broken sob comes out. Chloe does not stop. She points a manicured finger right at my wife's battered face. "You could not let me have one single night, could you? You had to come in here and ruin my perfect evening with this pathetic attention-seeking drama. My friends are here. Important people are here. You are completely disrespecting my aesthetic and humiliating my husband in his own home." I push past Chloe with a rough shove of my shoulder, dropping to my knees right on the cold floor to catch Beatrice just as her legs finally give out. I wrap my arms around her trembling frame, pulling her tight against my chest. Her skin is freezing. She feels so small, so incredibly fragile. I press my hand to the back of her head, feeling a knot forming at the base of her skull. Someone did this to her. Someone put their hands on my wife, struck her down, and left her bleeding. I look up, my vision blurring with a white-hot, blinding rage. My gaze searches the crowd, finding my son. Jamal is standing 10 feet away. He is staring at the floor, his face pale, his hands shoved deep into his expensive trouser pockets. He is not running to his mother. He is not demanding to know who hurt her. He is cowering behind his wife, paralyzed by his own spineless cowardice. "Jamal!" I roar, my voice booming off the high vaulted ceilings, shaking the expensive artwork on the walls. "Look at your mother. Call an ambulance right now. Look at her face." Jamal flinches, but he does not move. He glances nervously at Chloe, then at her brother Brad, who is standing near the hallway archway with his arms crossed, a dark, unreadable expression on his face. "Dad, just keep your voice down," Jamal mutters, stepping further back into the crowd. "Chloe is right. You both are making a massive scene. Just take Mom to the guest bathroom and clean her up. We can figure this out quietly." The betrayal hits me harder than any physical blow I ever took on the docks. My own flesh and blood, the boy I sacrificed my body to raise, is telling me to hide his bleeding mother in a bathroom so we do not upset his wealthy guests. The sheer indignity of it breaks the last remaining chain holding my temper in place. I gently lay Beatrice back against the doorframe, shrugging off my heavy suit jacket to wrap it tightly around her freezing shoulders. I stand up slowly, feeling every inch of my 6'2" frame tighten with deadly purpose. I turn my eyes entirely on Chloe and the crowd of elites who are whispering and pointing their smartphones at us. If any of you speak another disrespectful word to my wife, I will tear this room apart with my bare hands, I say. My voice is no longer a shout. It is a low, gravelly promise of violence. I am looking right at Chloe, my fists clenched so hard my fingernails are digging into my palms. I do not care about your party. I do not care about your aesthetic. Someone attacked my wife, and nobody is leaving this house until I find out exactly what happened. The wealthy guests shrink back, their arrogant smirks vanishing behind masks of genuine alarm. I take a heavy step toward my son, fully prepared to grab him by the lapels of his tailored suit and shake some sense into him. But before I can cross the floor, a small, terrified wail echoes from the top of the grand staircase. Everyone turns. It is Leo, our 7-year-old grandson. He is wearing his little blue dinosaur pajamas, his bare feet padding softly against the hardwood. His face is red and blotchy, covered in fresh tears, and what looks like a smear of dirt across his cheek. He is hyperventilating, his small chest heaving with every ragged breath. He does not run to his mother. He does not run to his father. He sprints directly down the sweeping stairs, dodging the catered trays and the shocked guests, and throws his tiny arms desperately around my leg, burying his face in my trousers. Leo, I say, my anger instantly melting into panic. I drop to one knee, grabbing his small shoulders. "Buddy, what is wrong? Why are you crying?" Leo looks up at me, his large brown eyes wide with absolute terror. He raises a trembling, tiny finger and points directly across the room, past the crowd, past his own parents, pointing straight at his uncle. He points at Brad. "Grandma saved me," Leo screams, his voice cracking with pure, unfiltered childhood trauma. Uncle Brad hit her. He pushed her down and hit her in the face. The silence that follows that sentence is absolute. It is a vacuum that sucks all the air out of the $2 million mansion. The string quartet in the corner stops playing entirely. The waiters freeze in their tracks. I feel the blood drain completely out of my face, only to come rushing back with the force of a freight train. I slowly turn my head to look at Brad. He is standing near the hallway, his face suddenly twitching with a nervous, panicked energy. The slick, arrogant real estate developer is suddenly sweating, his eyes darting frantically around the room as the crowd turns their collective gaze upon him. "That is a lie," Brad shouts, taking a sudden step backward, his voice pitching high with defensive rage. "The kid is lying. I have not even seen that crazy old woman all day. She is probably drunk and fell on her face. She has lost her mind, and now the kid is making up stories because he watches too many movies." I do not hear the rest of his excuses. A red veil drops over my vision. The man standing in front of me put his hands on my wife. He beat the woman I love and traumatized my 7-year-old grandson. I rise from the floor, my muscles coiling like tight steel springs. I am going to break him. I do not care about the police. I do not care about the money. I do not care about the consequences. I am going to end him right here on this imported marble floor. I take one massive stride forward, but Chloe immediately throws herself in front of her brother. She is screaming hysterically, waving her arms in the air to block my path. "Do not you dare touch him!" Chloe shrieks, her face red and distorted with fury. "You violent thug! I knew you people were nothing but trouble. Jamal, do something. Call security right now. Get these crazy people out of my house before I call the police and have them all arrested." I look at my son, expecting him to finally wake up. I expect him to look at his battered mother, his terrified son, and do the right thing. I expect him to stand by his family. Instead, Jamal walks over to the coat check closet. He moves with a sickening, cowardly, mechanical stiffness. He grabs my heavy winter coat off a hanger, walks over to where I am standing, and shoves the fabric against my chest. He will not even look me in the eye. "Dad, just leave," Jamal says, his voice a hollow, trembling whisper. "You have to go. You are ruining everything. Just take Mom and get out." The words strike me with a finality that shatters my heart into 1,000 irreparable pieces. He is choosing them. He is choosing the money, the mansion, and the status over his own mother's blood and his own son's tears. The boy I raised is dead, replaced by a pathetic, spineless shell of a man who would rather watch his family be destroyed than lose his comfortable lifestyle. I do not argue anymore. Arguing is for people who still believe there is something left to save. I look at Jamal one last time, letting him see the utter cold disgust in my eyes. "You stopped being my son tonight," I tell him softly, my voice carrying a quiet, devastating weight. I turn my back on the crowd of wealthy cowards. I reach down and scoop my weeping grandson into my left arm, holding him tight against my shoulder. With my right arm, I gently lift Beatrice from the floor, supporting her entire weight as she leans heavily against my side. She buries her bruised face in my neck, crying softly into my collar. I carry my battered family out through those heavy mahogany doors, stepping out into the freezing, unforgiving Atlanta night. Behind me, the doors slam shut with a loud, echoing boom, locking us out in the cold. But as the freezing wind hits my face, the grief in my chest hardens into solid, unbreakable ice. They think they have won. They think because they have money and power, they can throw us away like trash and walk away clean. They have absolutely no idea what they have just unleashed, and I am going to make them pay for every single drop of blood my wife spilled tonight. The drive to Atlanta General Hospital was a blur of flashing streetlights and the heavy thrum of my truck engine. I kept the heater blasting on high, but Beatrice could not stop shivering. She sat in the passenger seat, with my thick winter coat wrapped around her shoulders, her head resting against the cold glass of the window. Her breathing was shallow and uneven. Every time we hit a pothole or a rough patch of asphalt, a soft whimper escaped her swollen lips. In the rearview mirror, I could see Leo huddled in the back seat. He had pulled his knees tightly to his chest, his little hands gripping his pajama pants. The vibrant, energetic boy, who usually talked my ear off about dinosaurs and video games, was completely mute. His silence terrified me even more than his tears had. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. My mind was a violent storm of rage and disbelief. I had spent my entire adult life providing for my son, sacrificing my own body on the docks so he could live comfortably. And tonight, he had stood by and watched his wife throw us out into the freezing cold after her brother violently assaulted his mother. It was a level of betrayal that defied human logic. I pushed the accelerator down, weaving through the late-night traffic, praying we would reach the emergency room before Beatrice slipped deeper into shock. When we finally pulled up to the brightly lit entrance of the hospital, I did not bother looking for a parking spot. I left the truck right in the drop-off zone with the hazard lights blinking. I rushed around to the passenger side, scooped Beatrice up into my arms, and carried her through the sliding glass doors. Leo followed closely behind me, his small hand clutching the belt loop of my trousers. The emergency room was chaotic, filled with the harsh glare of fluorescent lights and the sharp smells of bleach and rubbing alcohol. But the moment the triage nurses saw Beatrice, they moved with immediate urgency. They brought a gurney out to the waiting area, helped me lay her down, and immediately began barking medical questions at me. I told them everything I knew. I told them she had been struck forcefully in the face, pushed, and had hit the back of her head. They wheeled her back into the trauma bay, leaving me and Leo sitting on hard plastic chairs in the waiting room. Time seemed to lose all meaning. I sat there holding my grandson tight against my side, whispering gentle reassurances that I would never let anyone hurt him again. A doctor eventually came out to speak with me. His face was grim. He explained that Beatrice had suffered a fractured orbital bone, a severe concussion, and was experiencing deep psychological shock. He also told me something else. He said the pattern of her bruising and the defensive marks on her forearms indicated a physical assault. By law, the hospital was mandated to report injuries of this nature to the authorities. He had already called the Atlanta police. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. I wanted the police involved. I wanted Brad in handcuffs. I wanted him to answer for what he did to the woman I love. Within 20 minutes, 2 uniformed officers walked through the sliding doors and approached us. They were young, but they had the serious, no-nonsense demeanor of men who dealt with late-night violence on a regular basis. They pulled out their notepads and asked me to walk them through the events of the evening. I started from the beginning. I told them about the birthday party at the Buckhead mansion. I explained that Beatrice had arrived early to help. I told them about Leo running down the stairs, terrified, claiming his Uncle Brad had struck his grandmother. I was just about to give them Brad's full name and business address when the heavy emergency room doors slid open with a loud swoosh. I turned my head expecting to see another patient. Instead, I saw a sight that made the blood freeze in my veins. Striding into the harsh fluorescent light of the hospital waiting room was my daughter-in-law, Chloe. Right beside her was my son, Jamal. But they were not alone. Flanking them were 2 sharp-looking white men wearing custom-tailored suits carrying sleek leather briefcases. They moved with a predatory, synchronized confidence. They did not look like concerned family members rushing to check on a hospitalized mother. They looked like a corporate hit squad walking into a boardroom to execute a hostile takeover. I stood up from my plastic chair, my fists clenching automatically. For a brief, foolish second, a tiny part of me hoped Jamal had finally found his backbone. I hoped he had realized the horror of what he had done, left that cursed mansion, and come to beg for his mother's forgiveness. But one look at his face told me a completely different story. Jamal would not even meet my eyes. He stared firmly at the linoleum floor, his jaw tight, his posture rigid. He was hiding behind his wife and her hired guns. Officer, one of the men in the tailored suits, said, stepping smoothly between me and the police. His voice was calm, polished, and dripping with an easy authority. My name is Richard Vance. I am the legal counsel for Mr. and Mrs. Jamal Sterling. We are here regarding a highly sensitive domestic matter involving my clients and the man you are currently speaking with. The 2 police officers stopped writing and looked at the lawyer. I could see the immediate shift in their posture. In a city like Atlanta, money talks loudly, and the men standing in front of me radiated expensive power. I stepped forward, my voice rising in volume. I do not care who these lawyers are, I said to the officers. That woman's brother assaulted my wife tonight. My grandson saw the whole thing. They threw us out of their house instead of calling for help. You need to send a squad car to that mansion right now and arrest him. The second lawyer stepped forward, opening his briefcase with a practiced, fluid motion. That is a completely fabricated narrative, officer, he said smoothly. He pulled out a thick stack of documents stamped with official legal seals. In fact, we are here to serve an emergency court order. The lawyer turned and extended the thick stack of papers toward me. I did not take them. I stared at the documents, a sick, heavy dread settling into my stomach. The lawyer simply dropped the papers onto the plastic chair next to me. Those are emergency protective orders signed by a night court judge just 30 minutes ago, the lawyer continued, addressing the police but making sure every word echoed loudly in the waiting room. They grant our clients immediate temporary custody of their son Leo. They also establish a strict restraining order prohibiting this man Tyrone from coming within 500 feet of my clients, their property, or their child. I felt as if the floor had suddenly dropped out from under me. A restraining order against me. I looked at Jamal, my own son, the boy I had sacrificed my body to raise. "Jamal, what is this madness?" I demanded, my voice cracking with a mixture of profound heartbreak and boiling rage. "Your mother is lying in a hospital bed with a fractured face because of her brother. And you are serving me with papers." Before Jamal could mumble a response, Chloe stepped forward. She had wiped away the furious, screaming persona she wore at the mansion. In its place, she had carefully constructed the image of a terrified, deeply concerned mother. She clutched a designer tissue in her hand, dabbing at her dry eyes. "Officer, you have to understand," Chloe said, her voice shaking with a perfectly executed theatrical fragility. "My mother-in-law, Beatrice, has been very unwell. We have been trying to keep it a private family matter, but she suffers from aggressive, undiagnosed dementia. She has been having manic episodes for months. Tonight she showed up to my birthday party completely disoriented. She was wandering around the second floor, and she tragically fell down a flight of stairs. She fell down the stairs," I roared, unable to contain the explosion of fury tearing through my chest. "That is a bold-faced lie. She has bruises in the shape of handprints on her arms." "Please, officer," Chloe whimpered, shrinking back behind her lawyer as if I were about to attack her. "Look at how unstable he is. He is incredibly bitter and resentful of our financial success. He hates my family. When Beatrice fell, he completely lost his grip on reality. He started screaming, causing a massive scene and trying to blame my brother. Worse, he grabbed my son Leo and dragged him out into the cold night before we could stop him. He has been coaching Leo to repeat these horrible lies. He is holding my child hostage." The sheer magnitude of the gaslighting left me momentarily breathless. They had weaponized Beatrice's injuries, weaponized my anger, and spun a flawless, legally protected narrative to cover up a violent crime. They had a judge on standby to sign an emergency order in the middle of the night. This was not a panicked reaction. This was a highly coordinated, flawlessly executed legal strike designed to crush me before I could even get off the ground. I looked down at Leo. The boy was shaking like a leaf, staring at his parents with wide, fearful eyes. "Tell them the truth, buddy," I pleaded softly, dropping to one knee so I was eye level with my grandson. "Tell the officers what you saw Uncle Brad do. Tell them how Grandma saved you." Leo opened his mouth, his little chin trembling. He looked at me and then he looked past me at his father. Jamal finally lifted his head. He gave his son a dark, severe look, a silent, terrifying warning that communicated everything a child needed to know. Leo swallowed hard. He looked down at his sneakers and began to cry, silently shaking his head. The first police officer sighed, closing his notepad. "Sir, you need to step away from the child," he said, his tone shifting from investigative curiosity to firm, authoritative caution. "You cannot be serious," I said, standing up tall. My voice echoed in the sterile room. "Are you going to listen to these expensive suits and ignore a battered woman lying in a trauma bay? Are you going to ignore what this boy was screaming an hour ago? We have a signed emergency court order from a superior court judge," the second lawyer interjected smoothly. "The custody of the minor child belongs exclusively to his parents. If you do not step aside and relinquish the child immediately, we will ask these officers to arrest you for kidnapping and violating a protective order." The police officers placed their hands resting near their duty belts. "I am sorry, sir," the older officer said, his eyes hard and unyielding. "The paperwork is legally binding. This is now a civil matter regarding custody. You have to hand the boy over to his parents, or we will have to take you into custody. If you believe a crime has been committed, you can file a formal complaint with a detective tomorrow. But right now, you need to surrender the child." I stood frozen in the harsh hospital light. My mind raced through the options. If I fought them right now, if I pushed the lawyers or resisted the police, I would be arrested on the spot. I would be thrown in a holding cell, leaving Beatrice completely alone and vulnerable in this hospital. I would lose any chance of protecting her or fighting for my grandson. I was a working-class black man facing down a wealthy white family with a team of lawyers and the police on their side. The system was never designed to protect me in a moment like this. I looked down at Leo. My heart fractured as I saw the sheer despair in his tiny face. I reached out and gently smoothed his hair. "It is going to be okay, buddy," I whispered, forcing a calm I absolutely did not feel into my voice. "Grandpa loves you. I am not going to let anything bad happen to you. Do you hear me? I will see you soon." Chloe marched forward, snatched Leo by the arm, and yanked him roughly toward her. The boy let out a soft cry, reaching his small hand back toward me. "Grandpa," he sobbed, but Chloe quickly pulled him behind the wall of tailored suits. "We are done here," Chloe said, her voice dropping the fragile victim act and returning to its natural venomous pitch. "If you ever come near my house or my child again, Tyrone, I will make sure you die in a prison cell." Jamal turned around, refusing to look back, and led his family out of the sliding glass doors. The lawyers followed closely behind, leaving me standing alone with two police officers who were watching my every move. I picked up the thick stack of legal documents from the plastic chair. The papers felt heavy, loaded with lies and weaponized wealth. I watched the taillights of their luxury SUV fade into the Atlanta night. A nurse touched my shoulder a few moments later, pulling my attention away from the doors. "Sir," she said gently, "your wife is stable, but we had to heavily sedate her due to the pain and the shock. She will be sleeping through the night." I thanked the nurse and walked slowly down the quiet hospital corridor toward Beatrice's room. I sat down in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed and took her cold, limp hand in mine. Her face was swollen bandages covering the cuts, her chest rising and falling in a deep drug-induced sleep. As I sat in the dim light of that hospital room, listening to the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, a profound realization settled over me. I was not just dealing with an arrogant brother-in-law who had lost his temper. I was fighting a coordinated, highly funded, and utterly ruthless enemy. They had the money to buy lawyers in the middle of the night. They had the connections to silence the police. They were fully prepared to brand my wife as a dementia patient and frame me as a kidnapper just to protect their own. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully boxed in an uneducated, tired old longshoreman who did not have the means to fight back. But they fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. I had spent 35 years learning how to break down massive, immovable objects piece by piece. They had drawn the battle lines, they had taken my grandson, and they had brutalized my wife. I sat in the dark, squeezing Beatrice's hand, and I made a silent, unbreakable vow. I was going to tear their pristine, wealthy world completely to the ground. The harsh morning light filtered through the sterile, horizontal blinds of the hospital room, casting long, pale shadows across the linoleum floor. I sat perfectly still in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside the bed, listening to the steady, mechanical rhythm of the heart monitor. Beatrice was still heavily sedated. Her beautiful face was marred by the ugly, swollen, purple bruise that covered her left cheekbone. I held her cold, limp hand in both of mine, gently rubbing my thumb over her wedding ring. I had spent my entire adult life protecting this woman. I had broken my back on the Baltimore docks loading shipping containers in the freezing rain so she would never have to worry about a roof over our heads. And yet last night, a slick, arrogant man had put his hands on her and walked away completely untouchable. My son Jamal and his wife Chloe had played their hand perfectly. They had used their immense wealth and their high society connections to secure a midnight restraining order against me. They had branded my wife with a fake dementia diagnosis to explain away her injuries. They had legally barred me from coming within 500 feet of my own grandson. They expected me to surrender. They expected the tired old black man to sit quietly in a hospital room, completely paralyzed by the fear of the legal system. In America, a wealthy white family with a team of ruthless lawyers can make the truth disappear with a single signature from a sympathetic judge. They assumed I would be too intimidated by the threat of jail time to fight back. They assumed completely wrong. I gently placed Beatrice hand back under the warm hospital blanket and leaned over to kiss her uninjured forehead. I whispered a quiet promise into the silent room that I would make this right. I stood up and pulled my heavy winter coat over my shoulders, feeling the familiar dull ache in my lower back. I walked out of the hospital and stepped into the biting chill of the Atlanta morning. The legal document they had served me felt like a burning coal in my jacket pocket. If a police officer caught me violating that order, I would be arrested on the spot. I would be thrown into a holding cell with no bail, and Chloe would have the ultimate ammunition to destroy my family permanently. But I refused to be a victim in this rigged game. I refused to let my grandson grow up trapped in a house built on violent lies. I needed to know exactly what Leo had seen. I needed to know the truth about what Brad did to my wife. I climbed into the cab of my old reliable pickup truck and started the engine. The heater roared to life, blowing dry, warm air against my frozen hands. I pulled out of the hospital parking lot and merged onto the busy highway, heading straight toward the affluent northern suburbs. The drive took 45 agonizing minutes. The landscape gradually shifted from the chaotic downtown traffic to sprawling, manicured estates lined with ancient oak trees and towering iron gates. This was Chloe and Jamal territory. It was a world of country clubs and private security patrols where a beat-up truck driven by a black man instantly drew suspicious stares. Leo attended an elite private elementary school nestled deep within one of these wealthy neighborhoods. It was a fortress of privilege surrounded by high brick walls and patrolled by uniformed guards. I had picked him up from there a dozen times before the restraining order was issued. I knew the layout of the campus like the back of my hand. I knew the front entrance was heavily guarded with security cameras scanning every vehicle that passed through the main gates. But I also knew the school backed up against a dense, heavily wooded nature preserve. I parked my truck a half-mile down the road, tucked away out of sight behind a closed landscaping business. I turned off the engine and sat in the quiet cabin, checking the time on my dashboard. 10:45 in the morning. Recess for the second graders always started exactly at 11:15. I had 30 minutes to navigate the woods and secure a position near the playground perimeter without being spotted by the roving security patrols. I stepped out of the truck and zipped my coat tight against the bitter wind. I moved quickly off the paved sidewalk and slipped into the thick line of pine trees bordering the school property. The terrain was uneven and covered in slick, damp leaves. Branches whipped against my shoulders, and the cold air burned my lungs with every heavy breath. My 62-year-old knees protested the steep incline, but I pushed through the physical pain, relying on the stubborn endurance I had built over decades of manual labor. The sheer, primal rage boiling in my chest fueled every step. I was a grandfather on a mission to rescue his blood, and no piece of paper signed by a corrupt judge was going to stop me. After 20 minutes of careful navigation through the dense brush, I finally reached the back edge of the school property. I crouched low behind a massive oak tree, peering through the thick green shrubs. About 50 yards away, the edge of the playground was separated from the woods by a tall chain-link fence. The playground was a sprawling complex of brightly colored climbing structures and pristine synthetic turf. I checked my watch again. 11:12. The tension in my stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. If Chloe had kept Leo home from school today, this entire tremendous risk would be for absolutely nothing. Suddenly, the heavy glass doors at the back of the school building swung open. A flood of energetic children spilled out onto the playground, laughing and shouting in the crisp winter air. A couple of teachers holding hot coffee cups took up their positions near the playground equipment, keeping a watchful eye on the students. My eyes darted frantically across the sea of small, moving bodies, searching for his familiar face. Then I saw him. Leo was not running or playing with the other children. He was sitting completely alone on a wooden bench near the far corner of the playground, closest to the chain-link fence. He was wearing his heavy blue winter coat with the hood pulled up over his head. His small shoulders were hunched forward, and he was kicking his sneakers aimlessly against the turf. He looked profoundly isolated. He looked like a child carrying a dark, terrifying burden that was far too heavy for his 7-year-old soul. Seeing my grandson looking so broken sent a fresh wave of protective fury rushing through my veins. I waited until the nearest teacher turned her back to break up a minor squabble near the swings. I broke from the cover of the oak tree and moved swiftly and silently through the remaining brush, pressing my body flat against the cold metal of the chain-link fence. "Leo," I whispered, my voice barely carrying over the loud, chaotic noise of the playground. The boy flinched violently. His head snapped up, his wide, terrified eyes scanning the tree line. "Buddy." "It is me," I whispered slightly louder, stepping out from behind a thick evergreen bush so he could see my face. "It is Grandpa." Leo let out a tiny, sharp gasp. He immediately jumped off the bench and took 2 quick steps toward the fence, but then he stopped dead in his tracks. His little body was trembling. He looked frantically over his shoulder toward the teachers, and then back at me. The sheer panic etched into his innocent features was absolutely devastating to witness. Chloe and Jamal had clearly terrorized this boy into submission. They had threatened him to keep his mouth shut about the violence he had witnessed. "Grandpa, you have to leave," Leo whispered, his voice shaking with raw fear as he took a cautious step closer to the fence. "Mommy said if I talk to you, the police will come and put you in a cage forever. She said you are a bad man now." The cruelty of that manipulation felt like a physical knife twisting in my gut. They were poisoning his mind, using his love for me as a weapon to ensure his absolute silence. I crouched down so my eyes were completely level with his, pressing my calloused fingers against the cold metal wire separating us. "Look at me, Leo," I said, infusing my voice with all the calm, steady strength I could muster. "Grandpa is not a bad man, and nobody is going to put me in a cage. I am right here, and I am safe. But I need your help, buddy. I need to know exactly what Uncle Brad did to Grandma last night. You are a brave boy, and you know the truth." Leo bit his trembling bottom lip. Big, heavy tears began to well up in his brown eyes, spilling over his cheeks and soaking into the collar of his winter coat. He looked back at the school building, his chest heaving with silent, terrified sobs. "I was hiding in the closet." Grandpa Leo whimpered, stepping right up to the fence so the teachers could not hear him. "Uncle Brad was breaking things in the house. He was putting things in a big bag. Grandma came inside and told him to stop. Then he yelled at her and he hit her really hard. She fell down and she was not moving." Hearing the confirmation of the assault from my grandson directly validated every dark suspicion I held. Brad had not just lost his temper during an argument. Brad had been ransacking my son's house, and Beatrice had walked in on a violent crime in progress. "But then Mommy and Daddy came home," Leo continued, his tiny voice dropping to a frantic, breathless whisper. "They did not call the ambulance. Daddy helped Uncle Brad wipe the blood off the floor. Mommy saw me and grabbed my arm. She said if I ever told anyone, she would make sure I never saw you or Grandma ever again." My own flesh and blood had wiped his mother's spilled blood off the floor to protect a criminal. The magnitude of Jamal's betrayal was so profound, It momentarily robbed me of oxygen. But this was not the time for grief. This was the time for action. I need you to be strong for one more minute, Leo. I said, my voice urgent but steady. I need proof so I can protect you and Grandma. Can you tell the police what you saw? Leo shook his head violently, tears streaming freely down his face. They will not believe me, Grandpa, he sobbed, wiping his nose with his sleeve. Mommy said I am just a kid and nobody listens to kids. But I have it, Grandpa. I have it right here. Leo rapidly pushed up the left sleeve of his winter coat, revealing the sleek black smartwatch strapped to his tiny wrist. It was the exact watch Beatrice and I had bought him for his birthday last month. It was equipped with a camera function so he could record videos of his dinosaur toys. Leo fumbled with the clasp, his small fingers shaking uncontrollably. He managed to unbuckle the strap and pushed the watch through a small gap at the bottom of the chain-link fence. I caught the cold device in my palm, gripping it tightly. Look at the video, Grandpa Leo whispered, frantically wiping his tears. I was recording my toys in the closet when Uncle Brad came in. I recorded the whole thing. Please do not let them hurt Grandma anymore. I promise you, Leo. I said, my voice thick with fierce emotion. I will end this. I love you so much. Hey, you there. What are you doing by the fence? A sharp, authoritative voice shouted across the playground. I snapped my head up. One of the teachers was marching aggressively toward the perimeter, pointing a bright yellow radio directly at me. At the exact same moment, the heavy roar of a high-performance engine broke through the ambient noise of the suburban street behind me. I glanced through the trees and saw a massive black SUV with tinted windows pulling up to the curb near the nature preserve entrance. Two large men wearing dark suits and earpieces stepped out of the vehicle, scanning the woods. Chloe had sent her private security detail to monitor the school perimeter. She knew exactly what I was capable of, and she was not taking any chances. Go back to the swings. Leo, I commanded urgently, slipping the smartwatch deep into my pocket. Do not look back. Just run. Leo turned on his heels and sprinted back toward the crowd of children, perfectly blending into the chaos of recess. The teacher broke into a jog, raising the radio to her mouth to call the campus security guards. The men from the black SUV began marching quickly into the tree line, moving with tactical precision. I spun around and bolted into the thick woods, relying entirely on pure adrenaline and sheer instinct. I ducked under low-hanging branches and hurtled over rotting logs, ignoring the burning pain shooting up my calves. I could hear the heavy boots of the security detail crashing through the dead leaves behind me. They were younger, faster, and highly trained, but they did not have the desperate, blinding motivation of a man fighting for his family's survival. I used the dense foliage to my advantage, weaving erratically to break their line of sight. I slid down a steep, muddy embankment, tearing the knee of my trousers, but managing to keep my footing. I hit the paved sidewalk at a full sprint, my lungs screaming for oxygen. The black SUV was parked 70 yards away, but the guards were still thrashing through the brush on the wrong side of the embankment. I reached my beat-up truck, throwing the door open and diving into the driver's seat. I shoved the key into the ignition, the engine roaring to life with a loud metallic growl. I slammed the gear shift into drive and slammed my foot down on the gas pedal. The tires screeched against the asphalt, leaving a cloud of gray smoke behind as I accelerated violently away from the school zone. In the rearview mirror, I saw the two security guards burst out of the tree line shouting into their radios, but I was already turning the corner, putting a solid block of suburban houses between us. I drove aimlessly for 10 minutes, executing a series of random sharp turns to ensure absolutely no one was following me. My heart was hammering a frantic, erratic rhythm against my ribs, and my hands were slick with cold sweat. I finally pulled into the desolate, empty parking lot of an abandoned strip mall miles away from the wealthy neighborhood. I threw the truck into park and slumped back against the worn fabric of the seat, completely exhausted. The sky overhead had darkened into an ugly, bruised gray, and a cold, steady rain began to pound rhythmically against the windshield of the truck. I sat in the dim, silent cabin, pulling the black smartwatch out of my pocket. The device felt incredibly heavy in my palm, containing a truth that was capable of tearing a wealthy, untouchable family completely to the ground. I retrieved my smartphone from the center console and activated the Bluetooth connection. My fingers trembled slightly as I paired the two devices, navigating through the settings with focused urgency. A small progress bar appeared on my phone screen, indicating the file transfer was initiating. The silence in the truck was absolute, broken only by the steady drumming of the rain and my own heavy breathing. The notification pinged sharply, signaling the transfer was complete. I opened the video gallery on my phone. There was only one file saved from the watch. I took a slow, deep breath, bracing myself for the violence I knew I was about to witness. I pressed play on the screen. What I was about to see would not just confirm a brutal assault. It would shatter the very foundation of my reality and completely change the course of the rest of my life. The rain drumming on the windshield of my battered pickup truck sounded like a judge hammering a wooden gavel against a heavy desk. I sat in the desolate parking lot of an abandoned strip mall miles away from the manicured lawns and towering iron gates of the wealthy northern suburbs. The interior of the truck was freezing cold, but my palms were sweating profusely as I held my smartphone. The file had just finished downloading from Leo's small plastic smartwatch. It was a single video file. The thumbnail was entirely black, hiding a truth I knew would irreparably shatter my world. I took a deep, ragged breath, letting the icy air fill my tired lungs. 35 years of loading heavy cargo on the Baltimore docks had taught me exactly how to brace for physical impact. You bend your knees and you tuck your chin, and you wait for the crushing weight to drop. But nothing in my 62 years of life could have prepared my soul for the devastating betrayal I was about to watch. I tapped the screen and the video began to play. The footage was incredibly shaky and dark at first. The tiny camera lens kept brushing against fabric, revealing the distinct texture of heavy winter coats and expensive silk dresses hanging in a confined space. It was the master bedroom walk-in closet. I could hear little Leo breathing. The sound was high and rapid and painfully terrified. The tiny microphone picked up every frantic gasp my 7-year-old grandson took. A thin sliver of light pierced through the crack in the closet doors, illuminating a narrow section of Jamal and Chloe's lavish bedroom. For a few agonizing seconds, the room was completely empty. Then a loud, violent crash shattered the audio. Heavy wood splintered and decorative glass shattered across the floor. Leo let out a muffled whimper, the camera jerking wildly as he tried to push his small body further back into the dark corner, hiding behind a row of expensive shoes. Heavy, hurried footsteps pounded across the hardwood floor. A tall figure moved directly into the narrow frame of light. It was Brad, Chloe's slick, arrogant real estate developer brother. But he was not wearing his custom-tailored Italian suit tonight. He was dressed in dark gray sweatpants and a black hooded sweatshirt, carrying a massive canvas duffel bag slung over his shoulder. I watched the screen with my jaw clenched so tight, my teeth ached. Brad began systematically destroying my son's bedroom. He was not looking for hidden valuables like a desperate common thief. He was acting with deliberate, methodical destruction. He swept a row of framed family photographs off the polished wooden dresser, smashing the glass frames into the floor. He pulled out drawers and dumped designer clothing onto the expensive rug. He grabbed Chloe's extravagant velvet jewelry box, emptying glittering diamond necklaces and thick gold bracelets directly into his canvas bag. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the ribs. This was a staged burglary. Brad was faking a high-end home invasion. The gears in my head clicked together with sickening crystal clarity. They were staging this for a multi-million-dollar insurance payout to cover stolen luxury goods. It was a classic greedy scam perpetrated by a wealthy man whose legitimate businesses were likely drowning in hidden debt. Brad moved closer to the closet doors, hoisting a heavy bronze desk lamp above his head to smash the large flat-screen television mounted on the wall. Leo whimpered again, the smartwatch camera trembling violently in his shaking hand. Brad froze instantly. He dropped the bronze lamp on the bed and turned his head slowly toward the closet doors. His face was a mask of cold, predatory malice. He took a slow, heavy step forward. My heart stopped beating entirely in my chest. I wanted to reach right through the glowing screen and physically rip the man apart to protect my grandson. Brad reached his large hand toward the silver closet handles, but before his fingers could make contact, a cheerful, familiar voice echoed loudly from the downstairs hallway. "Jamal and Chloe, I brought the dinosaur cake early for the birthday boy." It was Beatrice. My beautiful, sweet wife had let herself in with her spare key, completely unaware of the violent felony taking place upstairs. Brad spun around, raw panic instantly replacing the cold arrogance on his face. He grabbed the heavy duffel bag and lunged toward the bedroom door, but Beatrice was already climbing the carpeted stairs. The tiny camera captured the exact moment they collided in the upstairs hallway right outside the bedroom threshold. The visual angle was partially obstructed by the doorframe, but the audio was perfectly clear. Beatrice gasped loudly in shock. "Brad! What on earth are you doing?" she asked, her voice laced with sudden sharp confusion as she took in his dark clothing and the large bag of stolen jewelry. "Why is this house completely torn apart?" Brad did not try to explain the situation. He did not offer a lying excuse or try to calm her down. He panicked like a vicious cornered rat. "You crazy old bat, get out of my way," he snarled. The camera lens caught a terrifying, confusing glimpse of the struggle. Beatrice realized instantly that Leo was supposed to be upstairs taking a nap. She screamed my grandson's name, her fierce maternal instincts overriding any sense of personal danger. She threw her body directly in front of the bedroom door, deliberately blocking Brad from getting anywhere near the closet where little Leo was hiding. She stood her ground as a proud black woman protecting her bloodline against a wealthy, entitled thug. "Move out of my way!" Brad roared loudly. A sickening, fleshy thud echoed terribly through the tiny speaker. The camera captured Brad swinging his closed fist with maximum brutal force. The heavy blow connected directly with the side of my wife's face. Beatrice cried out in sudden, blinding agony, a terrible sound that will haunt my darkest nightmares until the day the good Lord takes me away from this earth. She crumbled helplessly to the hardwood floor, her head striking the wooden baseboard with a terrifying crack. She lay completely motionless. I pressed my thumb against the screen to pause the video. My hands were shaking so violently, I nearly dropped the phone into the footwell of the truck. I pressed my forehead hard against the cold steering wheel, fighting a sudden, overwhelming wave of physical nausea. I had spent 35 years working in the freezing rain to protect that woman. I had shielded her from the harshness of the world every single day of our marriage. And this entitled criminal had struck her down in her own son's house while my terrified grandson recorded it all from a dark hiding place. I wanted to start the truck and drive straight back to the police precinct. I had the absolute proof of the assault on tape, but a dark, sinking intuition compelled me to press play once again. I needed to see the very end of the recording. I needed to know exactly how Jamal had reacted when he found his mother bleeding on his own floor. The video resumed playing. Brad stood over Beatrice, breathing heavily and cursing constantly under his breath. He kicked her limp legs out of his path and grabbed his heavy duffel bag. But before he could flee down the stairs, the distinct sound of the front double doors opening echoed from the floor below. Voices drifted up the grand staircase. It was Jamal and Chloe. They had arrived hours before the birthday party was supposed to officially start. The camera captured their hurried, frantic footsteps rushing up the stairs, likely responding to the loud sound of the violent struggle. Chloe reached the top landing first. "Oh my God. Brad, what did you just do?" she shrieked. Her voice pitched high with frantic, uncontrolled panic. I waited eagerly for my son to roar in absolute anger. I waited for Jamal to tackle the man who had just battered his mother into unconsciousness. I waited for the boy I proudly raised to act like a true man and defend his family. Jamal finally stepped into the visual frame of the camera. He looked down at Beatrice lying motionless, and then he looked up at Brad. His face was pale and sweating, completely void of any protective fury. "Brad, you absolute idiot!" Jamal hissed, grabbing his own hair in a gesture of pure, selfish panic. "You were supposed to be done and gone an hour ago. Why is my mother here? We agreed you would clear the wall safe and leave the property before anyone arrived for the party." The treacherous words hit me with the devastating force of a runaway freight train. They had agreed. Jamal actually knew about the robbery. My son was not an innocent victim coming home to discover a violent crime. He was an active, willing participant in the massive insurance fraud. He had given his brother-in-law the security code to the safe. He had planned to actively defraud his own insurance company, and his innocent mother had simply walked right into the middle of their pathetic criminal enterprise. Beatrice groaned weakly on the floor, her hand twitching as she slowly began to regain a fragmented, hazy consciousness. She blinked rapidly, her vision clearly blurred, looking up at the face of her son. "Jamal," she mumbled, her voice thick and slurred with terrible pain. "He hurt me so badly. Call the police right now. He was taking all your things." What happened next broke the final fragile bond of unconditional love I held for my only son. Jamal did not kneel down to comfort her. He did not pull out his smartphone to dial for an ambulance. He crouched down, his face twisting into a hideous mask of cruel, desperate self-preservation. He grabbed his injured mother roughly by the shoulders and shook her. "Listen to me very carefully, Mom." Jamal growled, his voice entirely stripped of any warmth or basic humanity. "You are going to get up right now, and you are going to walk out of this house. You fell down the stairs today. Do you understand me? You tripped on your dress and fell. If you breathe a single word about Brad or about this room to anyone, I swear to God, you will never see Leo again. I will tell the family courts you are completely senile. I will have you legally locked away in a psychiatric ward. You are going to ruin my entire life, and I will not let you do it." Chloe stepped forward, sneering down at the beautiful woman who had welcomed her into our family with totally open arms. "You heard him, Beatrice. You are nothing but a burden to us. Jamal, go help Brad get the bags out the back door before the catering staff arrives for the party. I will clean up the blood on the floor. Get her up and put her in a chair downstairs right now. Tell everyone she is having a severe dementia episode." Leo let out a tiny choked sob from inside the dark closet. The horrific sound of his own parents conspiring to cover up his grandmother's brutal assault was far too much for his 7-year-old mind to possibly process. The screen abruptly went pitch black as the watch battery completely died, plunging my phone back into absolute darkness. I sat alone in the freezing cabin of my pickup truck, staring blankly at the dark screen of my phone. For 35 years, I had deeply believed that if you worked incredibly hard, provided everything for your family, and raised your children with strict morals and unconditional love, they would grow up to honor your massive sacrifices. I had broken my strong body to give Jamal a life of pure comfort. I had deliberately shielded him from the brutal grinding poverty of my own youth in Baltimore. I honestly thought I was building a lasting legacy of generational wealth and familial stability. Instead, I had inadvertently funded the creation of a greedy, spineless monster who would sell his own mother's physical safety to protect a petty insurance scam. The warm tears that had gathered in my tired eyes completely dried up. The suffocating, heavy grief that had weighed down my chest for the past 3 hours entirely evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating, and terrifying clarity. My son had crossed a permanent line that could never be uncrossed. He had chosen to align himself with a wealthy criminal syndicate that viewed me and my wife as disposable garbage. They genuinely thought they had secured their grand victory. They had the local police on their side. They had the legal restraining order in place. They had the endless money to easily silence any conventional legal challenge I could mount. They believed that because I was just a retired blue-collar longshoreman, I completely lacked the intellect and the financial resources to dismantle their carefully constructed fortress of lies. But as I sat there replaying Jamal's panicked, frantic words in my head, a new and far more sinister realization began to slowly take shape. Jamal had said Brad was supposed to clear the safe and leave. Why would a man who supposedly lived a perfect life in a $2 million Buckhead mansion actually need to stage a fake robbery for insurance money? A man making a legitimate wealthy income does not risk years in federal prison for a few stolen watches and diamond necklaces. People only pull desperate, sloppy insurance scams when they are completely drowning in hidden massive debt, when they are bleeding cash constantly and desperately trying to plug a rapidly sinking ship. Jamal and Chloe portrayed a flawless, pristine image of high society success. They drove imported luxury cars, hosted extravagant catered parties, and openly sneered at my working-class roots. But the hidden video proved their entire glamorous life was a fragile, rotting facade. If they were truly desperate enough to fake a burglary and violently assault a senior citizen to cover it up, it meant their finances were entirely hollow. And if their finances were hollow, I needed to know exactly where all the money had gone. I had proudly poured over $1 million of my own hard-earned life savings into their bank accounts to help them buy that massive mansion and to set up the educational trust fund for Leo. I had generously given them the financial foundation to build their shiny empire. I looked out the windshield at the relentless driving rain hitting the glass. A dark, quiet fury began to crystallize perfectly in my mind. This was no longer just about proving an assault to a skeptical police force. This was no longer just about fighting a fraudulent restraining order in family court. This was about total, absolute annihilation. Jamal and his wealthy, arrogant in-laws had fundamentally misunderstood the true nature of the man they had selfishly decided to destroy. A man who spends 35 long years managing the heavy, dangerous logistics of the Baltimore shipping docks easily learns how to track missing inventory. He learns exactly how to trace the hidden, quiet movement of highly valuable assets through a complex maze of corrupted paperwork. I placed my phone carefully into the inner protective pocket of my coat, right next to my pounding, steady heart. I turned the metal key in the ignition, the engine of my old truck roaring to life with a strong, reliable hum. I shifted the truck into drive and pulled slowly out of the abandoned parking lot, the tires gripping the wet, slick asphalt. I was not going back to the police precinct to beg for help. I was not going to hire a standard family lawyer to plead for simple visitation rights. I was going to follow the money trail. I was going to meticulously trace every single dime I had ever given my treacherous, cowardly son, uncover the rotting core of his criminal lifestyle, and burn his entire pristine world to the ground. They had cruelly locked me out of my beloved grandson's life. They had viciously battered my wife. Now I was going to teach them the true, terrifying cost of their arrogant, unforgivable greed. The rain had finally stopped by the time the morning sun began to bleed through the heavy gray clouds. I was still sitting behind the wheel of my truck in that abandoned parking lot, miles away from the wealthy suburbs. The horrific video from Leo's smartwatch played over and over in my mind like a broken record. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my beautiful wife falling to the hardwood floor. But beneath the blinding anger, a colder and sharper question had begun to claw at my brain. Why would Jamal cover for Brad? Why would a man who supposedly lived a perfect, wealthy life in a pristine Buckhead mansion need to stage a cheap smash and grab robbery in his own home? People with real money do not smash their own televisions and stuff their own jewelry into canvas duffel bags. Men who build legitimate real estate empires do not risk decades in federal prison for a payout on some diamond necklaces. They only do things like that when they are suffocating. They only fake burglaries when the walls are closing in and they are drowning in hidden toxic debt. If Chloe and Brad were broke, what did that mean for my son? And more importantly, what did that mean for the legacy I had spent my entire adult life building? I turned the key in the ignition and the engine roared to life. I did not drive back to the hospital just yet. I needed answers before I could face Beatrice again. I steered the truck onto the highway, heading straight for the main branch of my bank in downtown Atlanta. I had poured every single drop of my sweat from 35 years on the Baltimore docks into a generational wealth trust fund. I had set up that trust specifically for Jamal and little Leo. It was meant to be their unbreakable safety net. I had handed over the administrative access to Jamal last year when my health took a slight dip because I trusted my own flesh and blood implicitly. I trusted him to manage the investments and ensure his son would never have to work a brutal physical labor job just to survive. I pulled into the bank parking lot 10 minutes before the doors officially opened. I stood out in the crisp morning air, watching the bank employees unlock the heavy glass doors. The moment they stepped aside, I walked straight into the grand lobby. The polished marble floors and towering ceilings felt cold and completely unwelcoming today. I bypassed the standard teller lines and walked directly toward the private offices in the back. I knocked once on the door of Mr. Harrison, the senior account manager, who had personally overseen my financial portfolio for the last decade. Mr. Harrison looked up from his computer screen with a warm professional smile that quickly faded the moment he registered the dark, grim expression on my face. "Tyrone," he said, standing up quickly. "You look terrible. Please sit down. Is everything all right with Beatrice?" I did not offer any polite small talk. I pulled out one of the heavy leather chairs and sat down hard. "I need you to pull up the complete ledger for the family trust fund. Right now," I said, my voice raspy and exhausted. "I need to see every single transaction that has occurred over the last 12 months. Every wire transfer, every withdrawal, everything." Mr. Harrison frowned, clearly sensing the raw panic vibrating beneath my words. "Of course, Tyrone," he said softly, sinking back into his chair and typing rapidly on his keyboard. He adjusted his silver-rimmed glasses and stared at the glowing monitor. I watched his face closely. I watched the exact second the professional composure melted off his features. I saw his eyes widen in genuine shock. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The blood completely drained from his pale face. "Tyrone!" He finally whispered, his voice trembling as he turned the computer monitor toward me. "I do not understand. I thought you authorized these sweeping changes. Jamal submitted the digital paperwork months ago stating you were shifting your investment strategy." I leaned forward, resting my heavy, calloused hands on the polished mahogany desk. I stared at the numbers on the screen, the numbers that represented my entire life. The numbers that represented every freezing morning I spent hauling cargo crates off massive shipping vessels. The numbers that represented every anniversary dinner Beatrice and I skipped so we could save for our son's college tuition. The trust fund was completely empty. It was not just running low. It was entirely hollowed out, millions of dollars gone. The screen showed a devastating balance of zero. I felt a sudden crushing weight press down on my chest, making it impossible to draw a full breath. The edges of my vision darkened. For a terrifying moment, I thought my heart was going to give out right there in the bank chair. 35 years of grueling, agonizing labor had been systematically erased. I gripped the armrests of the chair, trying to anchor myself to reality. Where did it go? I asked, my voice sounding like it belonged to a completely different person. Where did my money go? Mr. Harrison swallowed hard, clicking his mouse rapidly to pull up the detailed transaction history. It started exactly 11 months ago, Tyrone. Large sums were wired out every single week. 50,000 here, 100,000 there, all authorized by Jamal as the secondary trustee. The funds were completely liquidated and funneled into a private corporate account. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes tracing the digital trail of my stolen legacy. The money had not gone into conservative bonds or mutual funds. Every single wire transfer had been directed to an obscure limited liability corporation registered in the state of Delaware. I demanded Mr. Harrison look up the corporate officers associated with that specific company. He typed the information into a global financial database and hit enter. The results loaded on the screen, and the ultimate brutal truth struck me like a physical punch to the jaw. The shell company was officially owned by Brad, and listed right there as the primary executive board member was Chloe. My own son had actively participated in bleeding his parents dry. Jamal had used his administrative access to secretly siphon millions of dollars from the family trust right into the greedy pockets of his wife and her criminal brother. They had stolen my entire life savings to fund their extravagant fake lifestyle. The massive Buckhead mansion, the imported luxury cars, the designer clothes, and the lavish birthday parties were all paid for by the sweat off my back. Brad was a failing real estate developer. His properties were likely sinking under massive toxic loans, and he had used my son as a willing pawn to steal my money and keep his shady empire afloat. And suddenly, the horrific video from Leo's smartwatch made perfect, terrifying sense. The staged robbery at the mansion last night was never about stealing a few diamond necklaces. It was a desperate, calculated cover-up. I remembered telling Jamal 2 weeks ago that Beatrice and I were planning to meet with our lawyers to formally audit the trust fund and begin setting up a direct college payment plan for Leo. Beatrice was supposed to bring the original trust documents to the party last night to review them with Jamal. They knew the audit would expose the missing millions. They knew their massive embezzlement scheme was about to be discovered. Brad had broken into the house to stage a catastrophic burglary. He was destroying the property and stealing the remaining physical valuables to claim a massive insurance payout. They needed that insurance money to cover the stolen trust funds before the audit took place. They were going to blame the missing assets on the fake robbery. But Beatrice had arrived 4 hours early and caught Brad in the act. She had walked right into the middle of their desperate criminal conspiracy. That is why Brad struck her with such brutal, merciless force. And that is why Jamal wiped his own mother's blood off the floor and threatened her life. My son was not just protecting his brother-in-law from an assault charge. Jamal was protecting himself from a federal wire fraud and grand larceny indictment. He had sold out the woman who gave him life to cover up the fact that he had stolen millions of dollars from his own father. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal was so profoundly evil, it defied human comprehension. I sat perfectly still in the quiet bank office, absorbing the toxic reality of my situation. I had raised a coward and a thief. But the nightmare was not over yet. Mr. Harrison let out a soft, devastated gasp. He was looking at a different screen now, his hands hovering nervously over the keyboard. Tyrone. There is something else, he said, his voice cracking with genuine sorrow. I am so deeply sorry. I did not see this until just now. Jamal did not just empty the liquid cash from the trust. 3 months ago, he used his power of attorney to leverage the remaining assets. He took out a massive secondary mortgage loan. A cold sensation washed over my entire body. A loan against what I asked, though the terrifying answer was already forming in my mind. Against your house, Mr. Harrison whispered, looking away from me, unable to meet my eyes. He used the deed to your and Beatrice's home as collateral for a $2 million commercial loan. The loan went directly to Brad's shell company. And Tyrone, the payments have been completely ignored. They defaulted on the loan 60 days ago. The bank system generated a formal notice of foreclosure this morning. You are going to lose your house. The walls of the office seemed to rapidly close in around me. The small, modest brick house that Beatrice and I had purchased 30 years ago. The house where we had celebrated every holiday, where we had raised Jamal, where we had rocked little Leo to sleep on the front porch. It was gone. My son had stolen our home from right underneath our feet and handed it to a slick, smiling white developer who beat my wife. I was completely broke. My life savings were vanished. My pension was gone. My house was actively facing foreclosure, and I was about to be thrown out onto the street. I had nothing left to my name except the clothes on my back and the keys to an old beat-up pickup truck. I was a 62-year-old man facing absolute total financial ruin. Jamal and Chloe had executed a flawless, silent execution of my entire existence. They had drained my blood while smiling in my face. They thought they had left me with absolutely no avenue for retaliation. They believed that by stripping me of my wealth and legally barring me from my grandson, I would simply crawl away into the shadows and quietly die of a broken heart. I stood up slowly from the leather chair. The joint pain in my knees and the exhaustion in my bones seemed to completely evaporate. The crushing despair that had threatened to suffocate me just moments ago was entirely burned away by a cold, terrifying, and absolute focus. Mr. Harrison looked up at me, his face etched with deep sympathy. Tyrone, please let me call our fraud department. We can try to freeze the remaining accounts. We can alert the authorities. This is a monumental federal crime. I looked down at the banker and shook my head slowly. Do not call anyone, I said, my voice sounding completely foreign and dangerously calm. Do not freeze the accounts. Do not alert the fraud department. I want them to believe they have gotten away with every single penny. I want them to feel perfectly safe. Mr. Harrison looked deeply confused. But Tyrone, they have taken everything. You are practically bankrupt. The bank is going to take your home. How are you going to fight a family that has millions of dollars and an army of corporate lawyers? You have nothing left. I reached into the inner pocket of my winter coat and wrapped my large, calloused fingers around my smartphone. The device felt heavy and warm against my palm, holding the digital footage of Brad striking my wife and Jamal, orchestrating the cover-up. I have spent my entire life moving massive, impossible weights, I told the banker quietly. I spent 35 years on the docks dealing with corrupt union bosses, greedy shipping magnates, and men who thought they could break the rules just because they wore expensive suits. I know exactly how arrogant wealthy people think. They think because I worked with my hands, I am stupid. They think because they stole my money, they stole my power. But they made one fatal, catastrophic mistake. I turned and walked toward the heavy wooden door of the office, the sound of my heavy boots thudding against the carpeted floor. They forgot that an old longshoreman knows exactly how to fight dirty when the game is rigged. I stepped out of the bank and back into the cold, driving rain of the Atlanta morning. The freezing drops hit my face, washing away the last remaining traces of the accommodating, gentle grandfather I used to be. My son wanted to play a ruthless game of survival and deception. He wanted to align himself with criminals and throw his parents to the wolves. He was about to learn a very hard, extremely painful lesson. You never back a desperate, angry man into a corner, especially when that man has absolutely nothing left to lose. I pulled my truck out of the parking lot, steering back toward the hospital to check on my wife. The time for grieving was completely over. It was time to systematically dismantle every single pillar of their shiny, stolen empire. It was time to go to war. The neon open sign of the pawn shop flickered against the heavy sheet of gray rain washing over the cracked sidewalks of downtown Atlanta. I stood outside the barred glass door for a long minute, letting the cold water soak through the shoulders of my heavy canvas jacket. I reached deep into my pocket and wrapped my thick, calloused fingers around a heavy, smooth object. It was a solid gold vintage pocket watch. That watch had belonged to my late father. He was a man who survived the brutal indignities of the Jim Crow South, working double shifts in a sweltering steel mill just to put food on our table. He had handed me that watch on the day I got my first job on the Baltimore docks, telling me that a man's time is the only thing he truly owns. I had cherished that heirloom for 40 years, intending to pass it down to my grandson Leo on his 18th birthday. But standing in the freezing rain, I knew my father would absolutely understand what I was about to do. A piece of metal, no matter how precious, is completely worthless if your family is bleeding. I pushed the heavy door open and walked up to the bulletproof glass counter. I placed the gold watch gently on the scratched rubber mat. The pawnbroker, a thin man with sharp, tired eyes, picked it up and examined the intricate engravings through a jeweler's loupe. He offered me a fraction of what it was truly worth. Under any other circumstance, I would have turned around and walked right out the door. But I was not there to negotiate for a fair market price. I was there to secure a war chest. I took the thick stack of $100 bills, shoved them into my pocket, and walked back out into the storm without a single ounce of regret. I was trading my past to buy my family a future. With the cash secured, I did not go looking for a cheap public defender or a standard family court attorney who would politely file motions and wait weeks for a hearing. I needed a predator. I needed someone who understood exactly how wealthy, arrogant people manipulated the justice system and knew precisely how to dismantle them. Through an old connection on the docks, I found a man named Jackson Hayes. Jackson was a brilliant, no-nonsense black criminal attorney who had spent 15 years as a ruthless federal prosecutor before opening his own private practice. He was famous for tearing apart white-collar criminals and corrupt corporate executives. I sat in his sleek, minimalist office high above the city skyline, placing the stack of pawnshop cash directly on his dark mahogany desk. I did not give him a long, emotional speech. I simply pulled out my smartphone connected to a secure display monitor on his wall and played the downloaded video from Leo's smartwatch. Jackson sat perfectly still as the shaky footage filled the screen. He watched Brad violently strike my beautiful Beatrice down to the hardwood floor. He watched my own flesh and blood son Jamal actively conspire with his brother-in-law to cover up the brutal assault and orchestrate a massive insurance fraud. When the video finally faded to black, the silence in the office was absolutely deafening. Jackson did not offer me empty platitudes or fake sympathy. He picked up his desk phone and pressed a single button. "Get Sarah in here immediately," Jackson said, his voice laced with a cold, razor-sharp authority. "Tell her to drop whatever she is doing. We are going hunting." Sarah was a forensic accountant with a mind like a steel trap. She walked into the office carrying a heavily encrypted laptop and listened quietly as I explained the drained trust fund, the fraudulent commercial loans, and the devastating foreclosure notice on my home. From that exact moment forward, we operated in total, absolute silence. I gave them complete authorization to tear through every single financial record associated with my name, Jamal's name, and the fraudulent shell company. The hardest part of the entire ordeal was the agonizing, suffocating silence. Every single fiber of my being wanted to drive my truck straight through the front gates of that Buckhead mansion. I wanted to drag Brad out into the street and make him feel a fraction of the blinding physical pain he had inflicted on my wife. But Jackson warned me that any aggressive move, any confrontation whatsoever, would immediately trigger my arrest due to the emergency restraining order. They wanted me to lose my temper. They were actively banking on the angry, aggressive black man stereotype to completely discredit my character. If I ended up in a county holding cell, they would easily finish transferring the stolen money and vanish completely. I had to swallow my pride, chew on glass, and play dead. I spent my days sitting quietly in the sterile hospital room, holding Beatrice's hand, while she slowly recovered from her severe concussion. She was confused and deeply traumatized, waking up in the middle of the night, terrified that Brad was coming back to hurt Leo. I would stroke her hair and whisper steady promises that our grandson was safe, and that a fierce, unstoppable justice was coming for the people who hurt her. Meanwhile, in the outside world, Chloe and Jamal were putting on a sickening masterclass in public manipulation. Friends from our church congregation, who did not know the truth, kept sending me screenshots of Chloe's highly curated social media pages. While my wife lay in a hospital bed sipping water through a straw, Chloe was posting beautifully filtered pictures of herself, lounging by a luxury resort pool in Miami. But it was the captions that made my stomach physically churn. Chloe would post long, tear-jerking paragraphs about the supposed heartbreak of dealing with a mother-in-law suffering from violent early-onset dementia. She spun a flawless, tragic narrative for her thousands of wealthy followers, claiming she was carrying an impossible emotional burden. She posted pictures of herself hugging Jamal with captions praising her husband for his incredible strength during this devastating family medical crisis. They were drinking expensive champagne on a private beach, actively monetizing their fake trauma while bleeding my life savings dry. The sheer sociopathic audacity of their behavior was entirely beyond my comprehension. But every time I saw one of those smiling, arrogant photos, I simply forwarded it to Jackson and Sarah. Every post from a luxury resort was another piece of digital evidence proving they were spending stolen money. Working late into the night, Sarah meticulously unraveled the complex web of financial deceit. Jamal and Brad thought they were financial geniuses, but they had left a sloppy, arrogant trail. Sarah discovered that the millions siphoned from the generational trust fund had not simply disappeared. Jamal had authorized dozens of staggered wire transfers, moving the cash into a fake contracting company, registered in Delaware. From there, Brad had funneled the clean money directly into a highly secretive offshore banking account in the Cayman Islands. They were using my hard-earned pension to actively shield Brad's failing real estate investments from total bankruptcy. The most damning piece of evidence was the commercial loan. Jamal had forged my signature to leverage the deed to my home, but Sarah found the digital IP footprint attached to the electronic signature software. The documents had been signed from the IP address, registered directly to Chloe's personal laptop, inside their Buckhead mansion, while I was physically clocked in for a medical appointment across town. It was ironclad, undeniable proof of federal wire fraud, grand larceny, and identity theft. We had them completely dead to rights on the financial crimes. Simultaneously, Jackson took the original video file from Leo's smartwatch and handed it over to an independent digital forensics lab. They verified the metadata, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the recording had not been altered, doctored, or tampered with in any way. To ensure Chloe's high-priced attorneys could never accidentally erase or corrupt the file, Jackson uploaded the authenticated video directly to a secure, highly encrypted federal cloud server. The evidence was permanently locked away, safe from any corporate fixer or corrupt judge they might try to buy. We had gathered an absolute mountain of undeniable evidence. We had the offshore routing numbers, the forged signature footprints, and the brutal assault recorded in crystal clear, high-definition audio and video. I sat in Jackson's office staring at the thick, heavy binders of printed evidence stacked neatly on his conference table. A profound sense of vindication washed over me. I was ready to hand the entire file over to the district attorney and watch the police kick down the doors of their lavish mansion. But Jackson leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers together, and shook his head slowly. If we simply hand this over to the local authorities right now, we run a massive risk, Tyrone Jackson said, his voice incredibly serious. Brad has millions of dollars sitting in an offshore account and a valid passport. The moment he catches wind of an active police investigation, he will board a private flight and vanish into a country without an extradition treaty. Jamal and Chloe have enough remaining capital to hire a team of defense attorneys who will drag this out in the courts for 5 years. They will claim the video lacks context. They will drown us in endless legal motions and delay tactics while you slowly run out of money to fight them. I felt a cold, frustrating knot form in my gut. What are you suggesting, Jackson? I asked, narrowing my eyes. I am not waiting 5 years to see the man who battered my wife put in handcuffs. We do not wait, Jackson replied, a sharp, predatory smile spreading across his face. We need to catch them completely off guard. We need to assemble them all in one single room under the absolute certainty that they have completely won. We need to strip away their time to prepare their ability to run and their chance to call their high-priced lawyers. We need to hit them with a tactical ambush so overwhelmingly devastating that the police have no choice but to arrest them immediately on the spot. I stared out the large office window, looking down at the sprawling city traffic far below. Jackson was absolutely right. A conventional legal battle would give them too much room to breathe and maneuver. If I wanted pure, unadulterated justice, I needed to lure them out of their fortified mansion and into a controlled environment. I needed to feed their insatiable, boundless greed. To make the trap work, I had to perform the most difficult acting job of my entire life. I had to completely swallow my immense pride and suppress the roaring inferno of anger burning in my chest. I had to become the exact pathetic caricature that Chloe and Jamal desperately wanted me to be. I had to play the part of a broken, defeated, bankrupt old man who was crawling back to them, begging for scraps. I picked up my smartphone from the conference table and stared at Jamal's contact name on the screen. The son I had raised was dead and buried. The man on the other end of this phone line was a dangerous, greedy adversary who had stolen my legacy and endangered my wife. I closed my eyes, took a deep, stabilizing breath, and prepared to lay the final devastating bait. I sat alone in the quiet driver's seat of my heavy pickup truck, parked just outside the towering glass building where Jackson ran his law practice. The heavy morning rain had finally stopped, but the thick gray clouds still hung low over the Atlanta skyline, casting a dull, miserable light across the damp asphalt. I stared down at the blank black screen of my smartphone resting in the calloused palm of my hand. I needed to make a phone call that went against every single principle I had ever built my life upon. I had spent 35 years on the freezing Baltimore docks building a reputation as a man of absolute, unshakable truth. I had raised my son Jamal to believe that a man is only as good as his word. I taught him to look people directly in the eye and speak with honesty even when the truth was painful or difficult. But the boy I raised had actively chosen to abandon every moral lesson I ever gave him. He had chosen the path of deceit and violence. Now I had to use his own treacherous tactics against him. I had to swallow my immense pride and deliver the most convincing performance of my 62 years on this earth. I had to become the exact pathetic, broken caricature that my son and his wealthy wife desperately wanted me to be. I closed my eyes and took a long, deep breath, pulling the cool, damp air deep into my tired lungs. I thought about Beatrice lying in that sterile hospital room, with her beautiful face bruised and swollen. I thought about little Leo crying in the dark closet, clutching his smartwatch, while his uncle terrorized his grandmother. I let the burning protective fury wrap around my heart, forging my resolve into pure, unbreakable steel. I opened my eyes, unlocked my phone, and pressed Jamal's contact name. I raised the device to my ear, listening to the slow, agonizing, ringing tone. My stomach churned with a toxic mixture of profound grief and cold, calculating anticipation. The call connected on the fourth ring. "What do you want?" Jamal answered, his voice sharp, defensive, and dripping with arrogant irritation. "I told you not to contact me again. If you come anywhere near my house or my family, I will call the police and have you arrested for violating the restraining order. I am not playing games with you, Dad." I did not snap back. I did not raise my voice or demand respect. Instead, I let my shoulders slump forward, collapsing my chest to restrict my airflow. I forced my breathing to sound ragged and shallow. When I finally spoke, I made sure my voice trembled with a weak, pathetic frailty. "Jamal, please do not hang up," I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly on the first syllable. "I am not calling to argue with you. I am not calling to fight anymore. I am just so tired, son. I am completely finished." The line went entirely silent for a few long seconds. I could almost hear the gears turning in Jamal's head as he tried to assess whether this was a trick. The aggressive, defensive posture in his voice hesitated, replaced by a cautious, suspicious curiosity. "What are you talking about?" Jamal asked, his tone dropping slightly. "Where are you right now?" I let out a long, heavy sigh, staring blankly out the rain-streaked windshield of my truck. "I am sitting in my truck outside the hospital," I said, my voice sounding completely hollow and defeated. "The doctors just came to speak with me about your mother. Her condition is getting much worse, Jamal. They say the trauma from the fall accelerated her dementia. Her brain is failing rapidly. She does not even know who I am anymore. They told me she might not make it through the end of the month." I hated speaking those terrible lies into existence about the woman I loved more than life itself. But it was a necessary tactical maneuver. I had to paint a picture of total catastrophic defeat. I paused, letting a manufactured sob catch in the back of my throat, and that is not even the worst part. I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. "I went to the bank this morning to try and pull some money together for her long-term care facility. The bank manager told me the accounts are completely empty. He said the house is in active foreclosure. He told me I have absolutely nothing left. I am totally bankrupt, Jamal. I am going to be living on the street by next week." I waited for my son to show a single shred of basic human compassion. I waited for him to express shock or offer a sliver of sympathy for the mother who birthed him and the father who broke his body to feed him. But the silence on the other end of the line was absolute and chilling. There was no pity. There was only the quiet, terrifying sound of a criminal realizing that his massive embezzlement scheme had successfully crushed his intended target. Jamal actually believed that he had won. He believed that he had successfully ruined my life and secured his stolen fortune without leaving any loose ends. "I am sorry to hear about Mom," Jamal finally said, his voice incredibly flat and completely devoid of any real emotion. "But you know that her medical condition is exactly why Chloe and I had to take protective custody of Leo. She is not safe to be around our child. As for your financial problems, Dad, that is entirely your own fault. You never knew how to manage real wealth. You should have planned better for your retirement. I cannot help you. The sheer, unadulterated cruelty of his response almost made me break character. He had personally drained my life savings into an offshore account, and now he was lecturing me about financial responsibility. I squeezed my eyes shut, digging my fingernails into my thigh to keep the boiling rage out of my voice. I had to push forward and drop the final devastating bait. I know it is my fault, I whimpered, forcing myself to sound completely broken and desperate. I know I failed both of you. I do not want to fight you in court, Jamal. I do not have the money or the energy to fight those expensive lawyers you and Chloe hired. I know when I am beaten. I just want peace before your mother passes away. I just want to see my grandson one last time. You are not seeing Leo, Jamal snapped instantly, his voice hardening with defensive panic. Chloe will absolutely never allow that after the scene you caused at the party. You need to accept that and move on. I let out another heavy manufactured sigh. I understand, I said softly. I really do. But Jamal, there is something else you need to know. Something I never told you or your mother about. I paused deliberately, letting the silence stretch out and build a heavy, suffocating tension. I knew exactly how to manipulate the insatiable greed that had consumed my son's soul. When I was working on the docks back in Baltimore, I set up a private life insurance policy through an independent international broker. I explained, my voice sounding weak, but incredibly serious. It was a special union arrangement kept completely off the books and away from the local banks. I have been paying into it quietly for 35 years. It is a guaranteed payout policy held in an offshore account in the Bahamas. It is completely tax-free and totally untouchable by any domestic creditors or foreclosure courts. The absolute silence on the other end of the line was suddenly electric. I could practically feel the overwhelming pulse of raw greed radiating through the cellular connection. Jamal was a man drowning in a failing criminal enterprise, constantly looking for his next massive payout. How much is the policy worth? Jamal asked, his voice suddenly losing its arrogant edge, replaced by a tense, breathless curiosity. $5 million, I said quietly, letting the massive number hang in the quiet air of my truck. I heard a sharp, muffled gasp in the background. It was Chloe. She was clearly listening to the conversation on speakerphone. I knew her predatory ears would perk up the exact second I mentioned an offshore fortune. Despite the millions they had already stolen from my family trust, their lifestyle was a bottomless black hole of toxic debt. $5 million of clean, untraceable cash was a temptation they could not possibly resist. But there is a problem. I continued, my voice trembling perfectly. The broker requires a secondary trustee to sign the transfer authorization in person because of my age and my failing health. I was going to use the money to try and save the house, but the foreclosure is already processing. It is too late for me. I have nothing left to live for, Jamal. I just want to make things right with you and Chloe. I want to sign the entire $5 million policy completely over to you today. You can take all of it. I just want you to promise me that you will use a little bit of it to make sure Leo remembers who his grandfather was. The line went completely dead for nearly 45 seconds. Jamal had clearly muted the microphone. I sat in my truck staring at the rain hitting the windshield, picturing the frantic, greedy conversation happening inside that $2 million Buckhead mansion. I knew exactly what Chloe was telling him. She was telling him that I was a pathetic, beaten old fool trying to buy my way back into their good graces. She was telling him that this was the ultimate victory to take my final hidden fortune and leave me to die in poverty. They were actively talking themselves right into the jaws of the trap. The microphone suddenly clicked back on. Dad, Jamal said, his voice dramatically shifted. He sounded smooth, accommodating, and painfully fake. Chloe and I have been talking. We are obviously very heartbroken about Mom's declining health. Families should stick together during difficult times like this. We are willing to meet with you and discuss the transfer of this policy. If everything goes smoothly and the paperwork clears, we can certainly talk about arranging a brief supervised visit with Leo. A cold, triumphant shiver ran down my spine. The hook was set deep in their greedy mouths, and they were swallowing it whole. "Thank you, Jamal," I whispered, sounding as though I was crying tears of profound relief. "Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means to me. Where should we meet? I can come to the house." "Absolutely not!" Chloe's sharp, shrill voice suddenly cut through the speaker, interrupting her husband. "You are not stepping foot on our property again, Tyrone. If we are doing this, we are doing it in a secure, professional environment. My brother Brad will be joining us to oversee the transaction and ensure all the offshore routing numbers are legitimate. We need a neutral location." Her supreme arrogance was truly breathtaking. She was actually bringing the man who battered my wife to the meeting to help them count their new stolen fortune. It took every ounce of discipline I possessed not to scream a violent threat into the receiver. "I understand, Chloe," I said, keeping my tone completely subservient and weak. "I do not have a lawyer anymore since the bank cut me off. But the offshore broker gave me the name of a local wealth management firm downtown that handles international transfers. They have a secure conference room we can use. It is called the Hayes Financial Group. We can meet there tomorrow at noon. I will bring all the required policy documents. You just need to bring your identification to sign the transfer." I heard a brief muffled consultation between Jamal, Chloe, and Brad. They were likely running a quick search on their phones for the Hayes Financial Group, finding the sleek corporate website Jackson had set up years ago for his private legal practice. It looked perfectly legitimate. It looked exactly like the kind of high-end, sterile corporate environment where wealthy people went to quietly move vast sums of money. "Tomorrow at noon is fine," Jamal finally said, his voice dripping with condescending authority. "Do not be late, Dad, and come alone. If you try to bring anyone else or cause any sort of scene, we will walk out immediately, and you will never see Leo again. I will be there alone," I promised, my voice soft and defeated. "I just want this to be over." Jamal ended the call without another word. The screen on my smartphone went black. The heavy silence returned to the cold cabin of my pickup truck, but the suffocating despair was completely gone. I slowly lowered the phone to my lap, staring out through the rain-swept glass. I felt a terrifying, absolute calm settle deep into my bones. They truly believed they were walking into a sterile boardroom to easily manipulate a broken, grieving father out of his last remaining lifeline. They thought they were untouchable, wrapped in their designer clothes and their stolen millions. They had absolutely no idea that the Hayes Financial Group was actually the private office of a relentless former federal prosecutor. They had no idea that a forensic accountant had already meticulously mapped every single fraudulent wire transfer they had ever made. They had no idea that a high-definition video of their violent criminal conspiracy was already resting safely on a highly encrypted federal server. I turned the key in the ignition, and the truck rumbled to life, filling the cabin with a warm, steady vibration. I pulled out of the abandoned parking lot and steered the heavy vehicle back toward the downtown skyline, heading straight for Jackson's office to finalize the ambush. I had played the part of the defeated old longshoreman flawlessly. I had swallowed their insults, accepted their threats, and fed their boundless, insatiable greed. The trap was perfectly, completely set. Tomorrow at noon, Jamal, Chloe, and Brad would walk arrogantly through those heavy mahogany doors expecting to sign their names to a massive $5 million fortune. They had absolutely no idea what kind of absolute devastating hell was waiting for them on the other side. The heavy mahogany conference table in Jackson Hayes' private legal suite was polished to such a flawless mirror finish that it looked like a dark, bottomless pool of water. I sat absolutely motionless at the far end of the long room, staring down into the wood, watching the distorted reflection of my own tired face. I looked exactly like the beaten, defeated 62-year-old retired longshoreman my son deeply expected to see. I wore a simple, faded flannel shirt and heavy, scuffed work boots, deliberately dressing down to project the illusion of total financial and spiritual bankruptcy. But underneath that carefully constructed exterior, my pulse was beating with the steady, rhythmic precision of a ticking time bomb. I folded my rough, calloused hands together, resting them on the cool surface of the table. I thought about the 35 years of brutal, back-breaking labor I had endured on the Baltimore shipping docks. I thought about every freezing winter morning, every aching muscle, and every sacrificed holiday I had given up to build a lasting legacy that my own flesh and blood had systematically stolen. Jackson stood quietly in the shadowed corner of the massive room, casually adjusting the silver cufflinks of his immaculate tailored suit. We did not speak a single word to each other. We absolutely did not need to. The heavy silence filling the room was pregnant with an electric, suffocating anticipation. Behind the thick, frosted glass doors of the adjoining executive offices, an entire tactical team of federal agents and local Atlanta police detectives stood waiting in absolute dead silence. Our forensic accountant had delivered the final, devastating financial dossiers to the district attorney early this morning. The federal arrest warrants for wire fraud, grand larceny, and conspiracy were fully signed, sealed, and ready to be executed. I looked up at the towering antique grandfather clock, standing against the far wall. It was exactly 2 minutes to noon. Every bit of lingering fatherly grief completely evaporated from my soul, leaving behind nothing but cold, pure, unadulterated justice. Exactly. At noon, the heavy double doors of the conference room swung open with an arrogant, aggressive push. They marched into the room, completely radiating a toxic, suffocating cloud of unearned privilege and overwhelming greed. Jamal entered first, his chest puffed out, wearing a sleek, charcoal gray designer suit that likely cost more than I used to make in a solid month of hauling cargo containers. He did not look like a man burdened by the heavy guilt of elder abuse or massive corporate fraud. Chloe followed closely behind him, her sharp high heels clicking loudly and obnoxiously against the polished hardwood floor. She was draped in expensive seasonal designer clothing, carrying a massive, authentic leather handbag that I knew, for an absolute fact, was purchased directly with my stolen pension money. Her face was contoured with flawless, pristine makeup, projecting a sickening mask of absolute superiority. And bringing up the rear, acting as their personal wealthy enforcer, was Brad. The man who had viciously struck my beautiful wife down to the hardwood floor was casually wearing a custom-tailored navy blazer and flashing a bright, predatory smile. He looked completely relaxed, like a man walking into a luxury car dealership to pick up a brand-new toy. They thought they were walking into a sterile corporate boardroom to easily manipulate a broken, grieving father out of his last remaining lifeline. They looked like predators arriving at a slaughterhouse, entirely convinced that I was the helpless sheep waiting to be sheared. They took their plush leather seats on the opposite side of the massive mahogany table. They did not offer a polite greeting. They did not ask how Beatrice was recovering in the hospital. They did not even pretend to show a single solitary ounce of basic human decency. They simply stared at me with varying expressions of barely concealed contempt and overwhelming impatience. The air in the room instantly smelled of expensive imported cologne and aggressive greed. Jamal reached into his sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He tossed them carelessly across the smooth surface of the table. The heavy papers slid directly in front of me, stopping just inches from my folded hands. The printed words detailed the complete surrender of my fictitious $5 million offshore life insurance policy. "Let us make this quick and painless," Jamal said, his voice dripping with condescending authority as he leaned back in his chair. "You sign the bottom of the last 3 pages and initial the international routing numbers. Once the funds officially clear the escrow account, we will contact you about scheduling a supervised 15-minute phone call with Leo. And do not try any pathetic tricks, Dad. Brad has his own financial experts on standby to verify the offshore transfer protocols." I stared down at the thick stack of papers. I let my hands tremble slightly, playing the role of the broken, desperate father one final time. I slowly picked up the expensive silver pen they had slid across the table, holding it loosely and awkwardly in my calloused fingers. Chloe let out a loud, exasperated sigh, rolling her perfectly manicured eyes dramatically toward the ceiling. She leaned forward, resting her elbows aggressively on the mahogany wood. "Come on, Tyrone, hurry up and sign the papers so we can get back to our real lives." She snapped, her voice shrill and dripping with venom. "We have an exclusive charity gala to attend this evening, and I absolutely cannot spend all afternoon sitting in a stuffy, depressing office watching you feel sorry for yourself. You made your bed when you tried to attack my brother at the party. Now just sign the money over and go back to whatever miserable hole you crawled out of." Brad chuckled softly, leaning back in his plush leather chair and crossing his arms comfortably over his chest. He looked at me with an expression of pure, unfiltered amusement. "It is the best deal you are ever going to get, old man," Brad sneered. "You should be thanking us for even giving you the time of day." I looked directly at Brad. I looked at the hands resting casually on his chest, the exact same hands that had left a massive, swollen purple bruise across my wife's cheekbone. I looked at Chloe, who was actively monetizing my family's fabricated tragedy for social media clout while wearing jewelry bought with my blood and sweat. And finally, I looked at Jamal, my only son. The boy I had patiently taught to ride a bicycle. The boy I had fiercely protected from the brutal harshness of the Baltimore streets. He was staring intensely at the silver pen in my hand, his eyes completely glazed over with an insatiable, sickening greed. "I am not going to sign these papers, Jamal," I said quietly. I gently placed the silver pen back down onto the polished table. I deliberately stopped my hands from trembling. I straightened my spine, lifting my chin and pulling my broad shoulders back. The fragile, broken demeanor I had been carefully projecting instantly vanished completely, replaced by the towering, imposing presence of a man who had spent decades mastering the dangerous environment of the shipping docks. Jamal frowned, his smug, arrogant expression faltering for a fraction of a second. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice rising in sudden angry panic. "You promised. If you do not sign those papers right now, you will never see Leo again. I will make sure you die completely alone." I reached slowly into my faded shirt pocket and pulled out a small black remote control. "I am not signing them because there is no offshore life insurance policy." "Jamal," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble that echoed heavily off the high ceiling. "There never was. It was a complete lie. It was a piece of bait designed specifically for a group of greedy, desperate criminals who are drowning in toxic debt." Brad uncrossed his arms, suddenly leaning forward with a dark, aggressive scowl. "What the hell is this old man?" he growled, shooting a quick, confused look at Jackson, who was still standing silently and rigidly in the corner of the room. I did not answer him. I simply raised my thumb and pressed the button on the small black remote. A loud mechanical whirring sound filled the room. A massive high-definition projector screen began to descend smoothly from the ceiling, directly behind my chair. At the exact same moment, the heavy velvet curtains covering the office windows automatically drew shut, plunging the entire conference room into a sudden cinematic darkness. The high-powered projector mounted above the table clicked on, throwing a bright, blinding rectangle of light onto the descending screen. Chloe let out a sharp, confused gasp, shrinking back in her chair. Jamal gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning completely white as his breathing hitched. The digital video from Leo's smartwatch began to play in stunning, crystal-clear clarity. The shaky footage instantly illuminated the dark interior of the master bedroom closet. The heavy, frantic breathing of my terrified 7-year-old grandson filled the room, amplified perfectly by the high-end surround sound speakers hidden seamlessly in the ceiling. Then Brad appeared on the massive screen. He was caught dead to rights, dressed in his dark sweatpants, maliciously smashing the expensive bedroom furniture and violently shoving Chloe's glittering jewelry into the canvas duffel bag. Brad shot up out of his plush leather chair so incredibly fast, it tipped backward and crashed loudly onto the floor. "Turn that off!" he roared, his voice cracking with sudden blinding panic as he pointed a shaking finger at the screen. "Turn that off, right now." But the video continued playing relentlessly, refusing to hide their sins. Beatrice's cheerful, familiar voice echoed clearly from the downstairs hallway. The tiny camera captured the exact horrific moment she climbed the stairs and confronted the violent intruder. And then the most devastating sound in the entire world ripped through the dark conference room. The loud, sickening thud of Brad's fist connecting directly with my wife's face, followed instantly by the terrible, agonizing crack of her head hitting the wooden baseboard. Chloe shrieked, clapping both of her manicured hands tightly over her mouth. All the fake superiority melted off her face, instantly replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. Her eyes were wide and frantic, darting around the room as the reality of the situation crashed down upon her. The video rolled directly into the brutal aftermath. The heavy, frantic footsteps rushing up the carpeted stairs. Jamal and Chloe walking directly into the visual frame of the camera. The high-definition audio captured Jamal's voice loud and unmistakably clear. "You were supposed to be done and gone an hour ago. We agreed you would clear the wall safe and leave the property before anyone arrived." The color completely drained from Jamal's face, leaving his skin the pallid color of dirty chalk. His mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish, but absolutely no sound came out. He was watching his entire pristine life, his fake reputation, and his physical freedom completely disintegrate right in front of his eyes. The video played the final sickening threat, where Jamal violently grabbed his bleeding mother and promised to lock her in a psychiatric ward if she ever dared to tell the truth. The massive screen abruptly went black. The bright fluorescent lights in the conference room automatically flared back to full blinding intensity. Before anyone on the opposite side of the table could formulate a single cohesive thought or utter a single word in their defense, the heavy double doors of the conference room burst open with explosive, terrifying violence. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, nobody move!" A commanding voice thundered through the room, echoing with absolute authority. A massive swarm of federal agents wearing dark tactical vests and local Atlanta police detectives flooded rapidly into the enclosed space. The room instantly became a chaotic whirlwind of shouting voices and drawn weapons. Jackson Hayes stepped forward smoothly, pulling a thick stack of official arrest warrants from his tailored jacket pocket. Brad, acting entirely on panicked, trapped animal instinct, lunged blindly toward the massive glass windows as if he could somehow magically escape through the reinforced panes. He did not make it 2 steps. 3 massive federal agents tackled him simultaneously with brutal precision. Brad hit the polished mahogany conference table with a bone-shattering crunch, sliding forcefully across the slick wood before crashing heavily onto the marble floor. He thrashed and kicked violently, cursing at the top of his lungs, but the agents slammed their heavy knees directly into his spine, twisting his arms viciously behind his back. The sharp, metallic clicking of heavy steel handcuffs echoing through the room sounded like absolute, beautiful music to my ears. Chloe began screaming hysterically, a high-pitched, piercing wail of total disbelief and denial. "This is a mistake!" she shrieked wildly, backing away from the advancing detectives with her hands raised. "We are victims. He attacked us. I demand to speak to my lawyer immediately." She spun around frantically, trying to run toward the open doorway, but her expensive designer stiletto heels lost traction on the slick, polished marble floor. Chloe slipped her legs, flying completely out from under her, and she crashed down incredibly hard onto her hands and knees. Her designer leather handbag spilled wide open, scattering stolen credit cards, forged bank tokens, and expensive makeup across the ground. Two female officers hauled her roughly to her feet, completely ignoring her cries, pinning her arms and slapping cold, heavy steel cuffs around her wrists while she continued to kick and sob uncontrollably. Jackson stood calmly, amidst the absolute chaos, reading the federal charges aloud in a booming, authoritative voice. "You are all being placed under immediate arrest for federal wire fraud, grand larceny insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit elder abuse and witness tampering. We have completely secured your offshore accounts. The game is entirely over." I remained perfectly still in my chair, watching the glorious, systematic destruction of the monsters who had terrorized my family. I slowly stood up and walked around the massive mahogany table, navigating carefully past the struggling, restrained bodies of Brad and Chloe. I stopped directly in front of Jamal. My son had not tried to run. He had not tried to fight the federal agents. The sheer, overwhelming magnitude of his failure had completely paralyzed him. He was standing near the wall, his shoulders slumped and his hands shaking violently as a grim-faced detective locked the tight steel cuffs around his wrists. Jamal looked up at me. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, filled with hot tears of pure, pathetic desperation. The arrogant, condescending sneer was entirely gone. He looked exactly like a terrified little boy, realizing he was completely trapped in a dark nightmare of his own making. "Dad, please," Jamal begged, his voice a wet, choking sob as his knees buckled and he dropped heavily to the floor right in front of my boots. "Please, Dad, you have to stop this. You have to tell them it is a mistake. I am your son. I am your only son. Please do not let them take me away from Leo. I am so sorry. I am so sorry." I looked down at the weeping, broken man kneeling on the floor. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt absolutely no sorrow. I had spent 35 years sacrificing my own flesh and bone to build a decent, honorable man. But the creature sobbing pathetically at my feet was nothing but a hollow, greedy stranger who had thrown his own mother to the wolves for a few pieces of stolen silver. I stared deep into his terrified eyes, my voice cold, steady, and completely devoid of any remaining mercy. "You stopped being my son the moment you let him lay a hand on your mother." I turned my back on him completely, ignoring his agonizing, desperate screams for forgiveness. I walked slowly and deliberately out of the chaotic conference room, leaving Jamal, Chloe, and Brad to face the total catastrophic ruin they had brought entirely upon themselves. The long, dark storm was finally over, and it was time to go back to the hospital to bring my beautiful wife the ultimate absolute victory. The heavy, solid oak doors of the Fulton County Courthouse swung shut behind me with a loud, resounding thud that echoed deeply through the cavernous marble hallway. I stood incredibly still for a long moment, letting my eyes adjust to the bright, harsh, fluorescent lighting of the legal building. The air inside the courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and bitter industrial floor wax. It was the distinct, sterile smell of a place where human lives are permanently altered and absolute final judgments are handed down without a single ounce of mercy. Beside me, my beautiful wife Beatrice stood tall and proud. Her face had completely healed from the vicious, brutal strike she had suffered months ago. The ugly purple swelling was entirely gone, replaced by the warm, glowing radiance that I had loved for almost 4 decades. She wrapped her soft, warm hand tightly around my thick, calloused fingers, giving my hand a gentle, reassuring squeeze. We walked together down the long central corridor, moving with the slow, deliberate, and steady pace of people who have survived a massive, devastating storm and are finally ready to watch the clouds break apart. We entered the sprawling courtroom and took our seats in the very front row of the polished wooden gallery. The room was absolutely packed with legal clerks, eager journalists, and curious spectators who had been relentlessly following our story in the local news. Our brilliant, no-nonsense attorney Jackson Hayes was already seated at the prosecution table, organizing thick stacks of meticulous forensic accounting files. He looked over his shoulder and gave me a single firm nod of total, absolute confidence. We had spent the last 8 agonizing months navigating the complex, sluggish machinery of the criminal justice system. We had endured endless depositions, exhausting cross-examinations, and desperate, pathetic legal motions filed by high-priced defense lawyers who were trying to save their guilty, wealthy clients. But all their expensive tricks had completely failed. The mountain of undeniable physical and digital evidence we had carefully assembled was an unbreakable fortress of truth. Today was the day the bill finally came due. Today was the day the monsters who had terrorized my family would be entirely stripped of their fake glittering armor and thrown into the dark, miserable cages they truly deserved. A heavy, profound silence fell over the crowded courtroom as the heavy side doors groaned open. The sharp, metallic clicking sound of heavy steel chains dragging slowly across the floor sent a cold shiver running straight down my spine. The armed bailiffs marched the 3 defendants into the harsh light of the judicial chamber. They were no longer wearing their expensive imported Italian suits or their custom-tailored designer dresses. They were completely stripped of the lavish, unearned wealth they had so viciously flaunted. Brad was the first to shuffle into the room wearing a faded, bright orange county jail jumpsuit. The smug, arrogant real estate developer who had brutally struck my wife was entirely gone. He looked completely deflated and physically broken. His shoulders slumped heavily and his face pale and covered in a messy, unkempt beard. Chloe stumbled in right behind him, wearing an identical shapeless uniform. The arrogant, high society woman who had constantly mocked my working-class background was completely unrecognizable. Her perfectly highlighted hair was a tangled, greasy mess, hanging limply around her tear-stained face. She was trembling violently, her wrists securely locked in heavy iron handcuffs. And finally, my own flesh and blood walked into the room. Jamal shuffled slowly toward the defense table, his head bowed entirely toward the floor. He looked incredibly small and hopelessly pathetic. The boy I had spent 35 years raising, the boy I had broken my back on the Baltimore docks to protect, had traded his soul for a pile of stolen money. He did not dare to lift his eyes to look at me or his mother. He knew exactly what he was, and he knew his life was totally, completely over. The presiding judge, a stern and highly respected African-American woman named Honorable Justice Carter, took her seat at the high wooden bench. She adjusted her reading glasses and stared down at the 3 criminals with an expression of absolute, unyielding disgust. She had reviewed the crystal-clear smartwatch video of the assault. She had read the meticulous financial reports, detailing how they had systematically drained millions of dollars from my generational trust fund to finance their fake, luxurious lifestyle. She possessed absolutely no patience for greedy, entitled people who abused their own family members for financial gain. The sentencing phase began with a heavy, suffocating tension hanging thick in the air. The judge addressed Brad first, her voice ringing out like a heavy iron bell. She called him a violent, cowardly parasite who preyed on vulnerable senior citizens to cover up his own massive financial failures. She detailed the horrific nature of the unprovoked assault on my wife, noting that he had shown absolutely zero remorse for his actions. The courtroom remained entirely silent as she handed down her absolute unshakable verdict. Brad was sentenced to 15 consecutive years in a maximum security federal penitentiary for aggravated felony assault and grand larceny without any possibility of early parole. Brad completely collapsed into his chair, letting out a loud, pathetic sob as the reality of a decade and a half behind thick iron bars finally crushed his arrogant spirit. Next, the judge turned her furious, piercing gaze directly toward Chloe. She dismantled Chloe's pathetic defense piece by piece. She exposed how Chloe had actively orchestrated the elaborate embezzlement scheme, deliberately forging my electronic signatures to steal the deed to my house and drain my hard-earned life savings. The judge loudly condemned her for using social media to manipulate the public and falsely claim my wife was suffering from severe dementia simply to hide their sickening criminal conspiracy. "You are a profoundly greedy and manipulative individual," the judge stated, her voice echoing off the high ceiling. "You built an empire of sand on the broken backs of the people who trusted you." Chloe was sentenced to 10 hard years in federal prison for massive corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Chloe completely lost her mind. She threw her head back and began screaming hysterically, begging the judge for mercy, crying out that she could not survive in a prison cell. Her high-priced lawyer had to physically restrain her as she thrashed against her heavy iron handcuffs, throwing a massive temper tantrum like a spoiled, selfish child who had finally been told no. Then the courtroom grew completely quiet as the judge turned her attention to the final defendant. Jamal stood up slowly, his legs shaking so violently I could actually hear his chains rattling against the wooden table. This was the moment that truly tested the absolute limits of my enduring spirit. I stared at the back of my son's head, feeling a complex, devastating mixture of profound paternal grief and cold, righteous anger. The judge did not hold back a single word. She told Jamal that his crimes were the most morally reprehensible of the entire group. He had actively betrayed the people who gave him life. He had allowed a violent thug to batter his own mother, and then he had mercilessly threatened to lock her in a psychiatric ward just to protect his stolen money. He had sold out his family, his honor, and his legacy for a mansion he could not afford. Jamal was swiftly sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for being a willing accessory to felony assault and participating in massive wire fraud. As the bailiffs stepped forward to escort the 3 prisoners out of the courtroom, Jamal suddenly turned his head. His tear-soaked, bloodshot eyes finally met mine across the crowded room. He looked at me with a face full of absolute desperate terror and profound, agonizing regret. He opened his mouth, his lips trembling, as if he wanted to offer a pathetic apology or beg for some impossible last-minute salvation. I stood up slowly from my wooden bench, holding Beatrice tightly by my side. I looked down at the broken, weeping man wearing the orange jumpsuit. I felt absolutely no pity, and I felt absolutely no warmth. "You stopped being my son the moment you let him lay a hand on your mother," I said, my voice low, cold, and carrying a massive, terrible finality. Jamal closed his eyes and let out a broken, agonizing wail as the armed guards physically dragged him through the heavy side doors, disappearing forever into the dark belly of the penal system. With the criminal sentences officially handed down, the judge swiftly moved to the civil and financial restitution phase of the trial. The absolute justice she delivered was a thing of pure, staggering beauty. The court explicitly ordered the immediate total liquidation of the fraudulent shell company Brad and Chloe had used to hide my stolen money. The sprawling $2 million mansion in Buckhead, the symbol of their fake arrogant wealth, was officially seized by the federal government to be auctioned off to the highest bidder. Every single luxury car, every piece of expensive designer jewelry, and every hidden offshore bank account was completely drained. The judge ordered that every single stolen penny of my life savings and my union pension be returned directly to my original family trust fund, fortified by massive punitive damages and heavy compound interest. The bank completely reversed the fraudulent foreclosure on our family home, restoring our pristine credit and wiping away the fake commercial loan Jamal had created. My legacy, the money I had bled and sweated for over 35 long, grueling years on the docks, was entirely restored and permanently protected. But the financial victory, as sweet and satisfying as it was, paled in comparison to the final ruling of the day. The judge looked down at the custody petition filed by Jackson Hayes. With both Jamal and Chloe facing a decade behind federal bars, they were legally and morally declared entirely unfit to parent. The judge signed the official heavily stamped documents with a swift, decisive stroke of her black pen. She granted Beatrice and me full, permanent, and absolutely irrevocable legal custody of our 7-year-old grandson, Leo. The heavy wooden gavel slammed down against the sounding block, echoing like a loud, joyful thunderclap throughout the entire room. Case dismissed, the judge announced, closing her thick leather binder. Beatrice let out a loud, beautiful gasp, covering her mouth, as hot, joyful tears streamed freely down her cheeks. I wrapped my large arms around my wife, pulling her into a tight, fierce embrace, holding her against my chest, as the massive, suffocating weight of the last 8 months completely lifted off our shoulders. We had walked through the absolute darkest valley of betrayal and violence, but we had emerged entirely victorious. The evil, arrogant people who tried to destroy our lives were locked in cages, and our innocent grandson was finally, legally, permanently safe. We walked out of the heavy oak doors of the courthouse and stepped together into the bright, warm afternoon sunlight. The heavy gray rain clouds that had hovered over the city for months had completely broken apart, leaving a brilliant, flawless blue sky in their wake. I took a deep, clean breath of the fresh Georgia air, feeling the warm sun heat my tired bones. The long, terrible storm was finally over. We drove our pickup truck straight back to our modest, comfortable brick home where little Leo was waiting for us on the front porch, sitting happily on the wooden swing. When he saw our truck pull into the driveway, he jumped up and ran across the green lawn, throwing his small arms around my legs. I picked my brave, wonderful grandson up, tossing him high into the air, and listening to his bright, innocent laughter completely erase the dark memories of the past. We were a family again, unbroken and completely untouchable. If my life story connects with you, and if you believe in the absolute power of family and justice, please hit the like button right now to bring a little sunshine and joy to this old grandfather's heart. Subscribe to the channel so you absolutely never miss my next real-life stories. And please tell me in the comments exactly where you are watching this video from and what time it is there right now. It makes me incredibly happy to know which beautiful corner of the world is listening to my voice and what time of day you are keeping me company. The greatest lesson I learned from this long, painful nightmare is that you must always fiercely protect the innocent people you love, and you must never ever underestimate the massive, unstoppable strength of a man who is fighting for his family. Thank you for listening to my truth, and I will see you in the next story. The heavy skyline of Atlanta slowly disappeared in the rearview mirror of my pickup truck, shrinking into a jagged gray silhouette, before finally vanishing completely behind a thick wall of towering green pine trees. I kept both of my hands resting loosely on the worn leather cover of the steering wheel, feeling the steady, reliable hum of the engine vibrating through the floorboards. The oppressive, suffocating weight of that toxic city was actively lifting off my weary shoulders with every single mile marker we passed. Atlanta had become a dark, towering monument to raw, unforgivable greed in my mind. It was a sprawling, concrete jungle where my own flesh and blood had willingly traded his moral compass for a fake, pristine image and a life drowning in desperate, hidden debt. But that nightmare was finally and permanently behind us. Beatrice sat quietly in the passenger seat next to me, bathed entirely in the warm, golden light of the late afternoon sun streaming through the passenger window. The ugly, violent purple bruise that had marred her beautiful cheekbone was completely gone, leaving behind her smooth, glowing skin. But the invisible psychological wounds always take much longer to completely heal. For the first few weeks after the dramatic conclusion of the trial, she would wake up in the middle of the night, shivering uncontrollably and clutching the heavy cotton blankets. She would suffer from dark, terrifying dreams about Brad breaking into the room, or Jamal shouting those cruel, vicious threats at her while she lay bleeding on the floor. During those long, quiet, agonizing nights, I would simply hold her close to my chest, wrapping my large, calloused arms around her trembling shoulders. I would whisper soft, gentle promises into the dark, telling her that the arrogant monsters were locked away in federal iron cages, and that absolutely nobody would ever lay a hand on her again. My strong, beautiful wife, the brave woman who had stood fiercely by my side through 35 grueling years of working-class struggles, was slowly finding her inner peace again. The bright, cheerful spark that Jamal and Chloe had tried so desperately to extinguish was steadily returning to her warm brown eyes. In the spacious back seat of the truck, little Leo was fast asleep, his head resting comfortably against a soft blue pillow. The boy had been forced to survive an absolute psychological war zone. His own parents had aggressively weaponized his innocence, threatening to completely take away his beloved grandparents if he ever dared to speak the truth about the brutal assault he had witnessed from the shadows of that dark bedroom closet. They had intentionally taught him to fear his own voice. They had actively instructed him to hide his natural emotions and blindly obey their sick, twisted rules to perfectly protect their criminal enterprise. When the honorable judge slammed her wooden gavel down and granted Beatrice and me full, irrevocable legal custody of our grandson, we made a silent, sacred vow to give him his stolen childhood back. The healing process for a 7-year-old boy is a delicate, beautiful, and highly complex thing to witness. At first, Leo was incredibly quiet, always looking over his shoulder, constantly waiting for someone to yell at him or violently punish him for simply playing like a normal child. He would physically flinch at loud, sudden noises and apologize profusely for the absolute smallest accidents, like spilling a glass of tap water or dropping a plastic toy on the rug. I spent countless hours sitting with him on the floor, building tall wooden block towers and telling him funny, engaging stories about my own rough childhood in the Baltimore neighborhoods. I made absolutely sure he understood completely that a real home is supposed to be a safe, secure sanctuary, not a terrifying, emotional prison. I taught him that a true, respectable man never uses fear or intimidation, to control the innocent people he loves. Over the passing months, the dark, heavy clouds in his developing mind finally broke apart and dissolved. He stopped whispering nervously and started talking in a normal, confident voice. His bright, innocent, unrestrained laughter returned, echoing beautifully through our daily lives and completely washing away the bitter, toxic taste of his parents' terrible betrayal. We absolutely did not stay in our old neighborhood, even though the corrupt banking foreclosure had been entirely reversed by the federal judge and our modest brick home was legally ours. Again, the memories associated with Jamal growing up in those specific rooms were simply too painful for Beatrice to bear. We decided to quickly sell the property and use the massive recovered funds from my stolen generational trust to buy a completely new sanctuary. We deeply wanted a place far away from the shallow, highly competitive materialism of the wealthy northern suburbs. We wanted a place where the air was clean, the front doors could remain unlocked, and the word family actually meant something sacred and true. We found our perfect slice of heaven nestled deep in the quiet rural countryside of northern Georgia. It was a beautiful, sprawling wooden house sitting right on the edge of a pristine, crystal-clear freshwater lake. The expansive property was surrounded by acres of ancient weeping willows and tall, fragrant pine trees. There were no aggressive private security patrols driving through the streets. There were no exclusive, snobby country clubs or arrogant neighbors judging the make and model of your vehicle. There was only the gentle, soothing sound of the wind moving through the green branches and the rhythmic, peaceful lapping of the water against the wooden beams of our private dock. I bought the lake house completely in cash, paying the entire massive balance in full. The immense fortune that Jamal and Chloe had tried to steal to fund their pathetic fake empire was now permanently securing a peaceful, beautiful existence for the people who truly deserved it. I walked through the spacious, sunlit rooms of our new home feeling a profound, absolute sense of total victory. The thick hardwood floors gleamed with a warm, rich polish. The massive natural stone fireplace in the living room promised cozy, warm winters. Beatrice immediately fell in love with the large open country kitchen, actively planning elaborate Sunday dinners and baking the sweet potato pies that Leo absolutely adored. Life rapidly settled into a slow, beautiful, and entirely predictable rhythm. Every single morning, I would wake up long before the sun crested the horizon, brewing a strong pot of dark black coffee and carrying 2 hot ceramic mugs out to the wraparound wooden porch. Beatrice and I would sit together in comfortable padded rocking chairs, watching the thick white morning mist slowly lift off the calm surface of the lake. We would hold hands in the quiet, beautiful dawn, listening to the distant call of the local wildlife, completely free from the toxic, suffocating stress of our previous life. One particular Saturday morning stands out perfectly in my mind, truly capturing the absolute essence of our new beginning. The sun was shining brightly in a flawless, spectacular blue sky, casting a million glittering diamonds across the gentle ripples of the lake water. I had bought Leo his very first fishing rod, a simple, lightweight spinning reel, perfect for a young boy learning the ropes. We walked down the sloping green lawn together, stepping onto the weathered wooden planks of the private dock. Leo was wearing a pair of comfortable denim overalls and a wide-brimmed straw hat, carrying a small red plastic bucket filled with wriggling earthworms. I showed him exactly how to bait the small, sharp metal hook guiding his tiny, smooth hands with my thick, heavily scarred fingers. I taught him how to pull the flexible rod back and cast the clear line far out into the deep, shimmering water. We sat side by side on the very edge of the dock, dangling our bare feet over the cool water, completely surrounded by the magnificent, quiet beauty of nature. Leo was talking excitedly about the massive imaginary fish he was definitely going to catch, his big brown eyes shining with pure, unadulterated joy. He was no longer the terrified, broken child hiding in a dark, crowded closet. He was a vibrant, happy, energetic boy, completely secure in the absolute certainty that he was deeply, unconditionally loved and fiercely protected. I sat back and watched my handsome grandson holding his fishing rod against the spectacular backdrop of the massive blue lake, and I experienced a profound, deep philosophical realization about the true fundamental nature of a man's legacy. For 35 long, agonizing years, I believed that my ultimate purpose in life was to build a towering, impenetrable financial fortress. I truly believed that if I broke my body hauling heavy shipping containers in the freezing sleet and sweltering summer heat, I could completely shield my son from the harsh, brutal realities of the unforgiving world. I thought that leaving behind a massive bank account and a fully funded family trust was the absolute highest achievement a working-class father could ever possibly accomplish. I was deeply convinced that generational wealth was the ultimate expression of parental love and devotion. But watching Jamal completely surrender his soul to pure evil greed taught me a devastating but incredibly necessary lesson. Money without a solid, unshakable moral foundation is absolutely nothing but a slow-acting, toxic poison. The millions of dollars I had painfully scraped together did not make my son a better, honorable man. It made him wildly arrogant, deeply entitled, and dangerously weak. It made him entirely susceptible to the corrupting, wicked influence of a woman like Chloe and a violent, ruthless criminal like Brad. It made him view the very mother who birthed him as a disposable, annoying obstacle, standing directly in the way of his next luxury purchase. Looking at little Leo reeling in his empty fishing line with a massive, bright, infectious smile on his face, I finally understood what a true, enduring legacy actually looks like. A man's legacy is not measured by the commas and zeros sitting idly in an offshore bank account. It is not measured by the square footage of a pristine Buckhead mansion or the imported leather interior of a sleek luxury sports car. A man's true legacy is entirely defined by the absolute lengths he will go to protect the innocent people relying on him. It is accurately measured by the unshakable integrity he demonstrates when his back is completely pushed against the wall. It is measured by his total willingness to walk directly into the fire, to tear down the arrogant monsters of the world, and to rebuild a safe, beautiful sanctuary for his bloodline. I unfortunately failed to instill that crucial moral integrity into Jamal. I have to live with that heartbreaking, heavy reality for the rest of my days on this earth. But the good Lord, in His infinite, mysterious wisdom, granted me a rare, beautiful, and profound second chance. He gave me the incredible opportunity to raise my grandson the right way. He gave me the precious chance to teach Leo that a real, honorable man always stands up for his family, that a real man absolutely never raises his hand against a woman, and that true, lasting wealth is exclusively found in honesty, loyalty, and absolute courage. Beatrice walked out of the back door of the lake house holding a wooden tray of fresh-baked chocolate chip cookies and 2 tall glasses of ice-cold lemonade. She wore a simple, bright yellow sundress, the gentle morning breeze playing beautifully with her hair. She walked gracefully down the green lawn and joined us on the wooden dock, handing Leo a warm, sweet cookie. She sat down right next to me, resting her head gently against my shoulder. I put my arm around her waist, pulling her close and kissing the top of her head. We watched Leo cast his fishing line back out into the sparkling water, his loud, joyful laughter carrying perfectly over the peaceful lake. The selfish, greedy villains who had tried to destroy us were locked away securely in cold concrete cells, entirely stripped of their fake power and their stolen wealth. The long, dark storm was finally completely over, and we had successfully navigated the treacherous, violent waters to find our perfect, permanent peace. I look back on the long, dark road we traveled, and I feel a deep, profound sense of pure gratitude. I am deeply grateful for the sharp, absolute clarity that came from the ultimate betrayal. I am incredibly grateful for the brilliant, ruthless legal mind of Jackson Hayes, who helped me expertly turn a desperate situation into a flawless, tactical victory. But most of all, I am endlessly grateful for the unwavering, unbreakable strength of my beautiful wife, who survived a brutal physical assault and emerged with her warm, loving spirit completely intact. We survived the absolute worst of human nature, and we built a new, wonderful life entirely defined by truth and genuine love. To all the fathers and grandfathers listening out there right now, I want you to hear my words very carefully. Never let anyone, not even your own flesh and blood, disrespect the solid foundation you broke your back to build. Love your kids with every single ounce of your heart, but never ever be blind to the painful truth. You cannot buy character, and you cannot purchase a moral compass. Teach your children the immense value of a hard, honest day of work, and absolutely never tolerate the toxic entitlement that breeds monsters. Stand your ground against the arrogant, greedy forces of this world and never ever surrender your dignity. If this story resonated with your heart, and if you believe in the absolute power of protecting your family, please hit that like button right now to bring a little sunshine and joy to this old man's day. Subscribe to the channel so you absolutely never miss my next real-life story. Please tell me down in the comments exactly what city or state you are watching from and what time it is there right now. I truly love seeing exactly where my brothers and sisters are tuning in from across the world. Stay strong, keep your eyes open, and always keep protecting yours.